Hello, my fellow Westorians. Welcome to Valar Rereadis for Dunk and Egg. It's an epilogue to our full series review. We had originally not planned on having another Valar Rereadis episode, but two factors led us to this fun decision of having one more episode. And, well, let's see what today brings us, my fellow Westorians. One of the things it brings us is one of the reasons we decided to do one more episode, which is our guest, Stefan Sasse, who was last minute unable to make it. Head colds make podcasting very much unfeasible and unpleasant, so we had to move that around. So I'm glad we were able to move it only a couple of weeks instead of, having to cancel it or something. Welcome, Stefan. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Right on. I was just on your show. We were having a great discussion on the golden age of the next few months of 2021 of all these great shows and even a few books and other things coming out. And well, that's kind of timely because we talked about that. And in between then, we've had a House of the Dragon trailer. And while we're not going to talk about that here, it's interesting as a additional piece of info because we are going to talk about the potential for Dunk and Egg on HBO, which it is in development. It isn't guaranteed to hit the screen, but it is in development. And well, it's kind of neat that Dunk and Egg falls almost exactly halfway between A Song of Ice and Fire and The Dance of the Dragons in terms of chronology. The year 212 is, well, The Dance of the Dragons is 82 years, begins about 81 years before that, 83 years before that, and A Song of Ice and Fire starts about 86 years after that. So really close together. And of course, Stefan, tell us about your other work here. I know you've been doing Boiled Leather Audio Hour for a long time. It's one of the longest running podcasts in the community. And you also do the Nerdstream era blog, which is excellent. So tell us about those for a minute.
Thank you for the high praise. It is true. I'm always claiming for lack of better knowledge and also a lack of deep research into the subject. I think we are more or less the second longest running podcast that is still active today after the podcast of Ice and Fire.
I think that's right.
We have our 10th year anniversary this year. It comes up in December where we will do a fun birthday episode on which you are also featured.
Yeah.
If you remember, I think we recorded that snippet back in April or something, but
yeah.
But still,
wow,
it will come out in December.
That's awesome. Yeah,
and that is the Boiled Leather Audio Hour. I've been doing it with Sean T. Collins, but we also have a slew of guest hosts that come over more or less regularly. Among them, you, as you just mentioned. So thanks again for doing this. And then I have my blog for all things nerd, which is the nerdstream.blogspot.com, where you can read essays about TV series, Game of Thrones stuff, more TV series, movies. I'm currently reviewing all movies with Channing Tatum in them, and please don't ask me why I do that.
No justification needed.
I'm also doing a series on all movies with Kevin Costner and one with all movies with Jennifer Lawrence. And it's a weird trip. So if you want to join me.
Would you ever do Kevin Bacon? Because that's the guy that everyone talks about, connects to everyone. 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever.
Not yet.
Yeah.
But so far, I'm most positively surprised by Channing Tatum. I want him cast somewhere.
That is fantastic.
Better than he has any right to.
What a creative idea. Sean, I know that's got to be an interesting idea for you. You're being such a movie buff, hearing that. Like, that's not I wonder, have you ever considered a categorization style like that?
Sort of. There's so many different ways to categorize things.
True.
And it's a combination of in addition to an actor or a genre, there's also what you like or what your audience will like. It's a lot to think about. And but immediately when you said those, especially Kevin Costner, so many movies sort of flooding through my head. It's that's gonna be quite an endeavor to go through them all.
He's got long movies too. Some are really lengthy films, like The Postman,
God, yes,
Waterworld, Dances.
If I was gonna do that, I would do something. I would do Daniel Day-Lewis, just 5 really good movies, and then
those are also long ones.
Yeah, but that's boring. I mean, everyone knows they're good. With actors like Kevin Costner, you stumble over movies where you're thinking, "What the fuck is this? I never heard of this." I watched a Disney movie that's basically made for small kids, McFarland USA. It's from 2015, where he plays a football coach, and it was produced for the Disney Channel. That guy's doing all sorts of stuff. It was surprisingly good, by the way.
Oh, you watch it with your kids?
No, I didn't know it was a kids movie.
That's hilarious. So the next day you're like telling your kids about this kids movie you watch. You're like, what? What are you watching movies without us? Well, one thing that's also hard to categorize is your beverages, Sean. What are you drinking today?
Today, this is the protein berry naked drink. Not too unusual for me, with the black raspberry sparkling ice. Also not too unusual for me. But instead of Mountain Dew, once again Dr. Pepper. That's what my new experiment has been.
What the?
And it's really good.
Do you endeavor to make them weirder just knowing that you're gonna have to say what they are at all?
I hold back.
Yeah, I was going to say, having lived with you, no, he doesn't. He doesn't make them weirder for the podcast. So yeah, check out Stefan's podcast, Boiled Leather Audio Hour, also nerdstreamera.blogspot.com, and of course, Good Queen Alley with 1l.tumblr.com. Nina's help is invaluable to our Valar Rereadis episodes. A recent post on her blog involves a topic we are discussing today: possible ways for the she-wolves of Winterfell to play out, including who the candidates are and how well it compares to some of the succession issues that might happen at Winterfell in A Song of Ice and Fire proper. Because as we know, it's a long-standing rule that George loves the whole concept of history repeating itself, and his setting is particularly well-suited for that, because while we do have things like political shifts and, you know, dragons going extinct, pretty major events that change the world a bit, we don't have, like, you know, inventions and technology coming along and just changing things massively. So Westeros, as far as these things go, is somewhat static, which enables the George to use it as a sandbox to write scenarios, sort of like, for example, we look at the situation with the Dance of the Dragons itself and wonder how that will parallel what's going to happen with Jon and Dany and young Griff. So it's a... yeah, go ahead.
You just sparked a thought in me. Most of real human history has been pretty static too. We have a really skewed perspective from the past couple hundred years. 10,000-ish years, very little happened, you know, technologically wise, as far as like the repeating of histories, wars and rulers and et cetera, et cetera. It's just neat to think about how suddenly things can change so much. You know, I don't know. I doubt Georgia would ever go in that direction, but
the introduction
not
of the
that
steam
weird.
engine.
Yeah, we're gonna have the steam engine. Dragon.
It's not that weird for him to have this world that's static, because the real world was pretty static for thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean,
people also thought about time as being circular. Basically, this idea of it being like this line that goes up into some direction of progress and change, that is pretty new. People used to think of time as a circle. Basically, for long time.
Yeah, it was like a more common philosophy. And yeah, and George himself has said this, because people have asked him, similar to what you said, Sean, like they've asked him, how has it been so static for so long? He's like, well, really, if you look at our own history, and he said something along the lines of what you said, like the Industrial Revolution, before that, change was rare or rarer. And I saw once at another, I think it was Dan Carlin, the king of history podcasting, who said that, like, consider the fastest way to get from place to place. I think I may have even mentioned this anecdote once before, but it's so good that it's worth repeating. Think of the fastest way to get from place to place on land 10,000 years ago was a horse. 5,000 years ago, it was a horse. 1,000 years ago, it was a horse. 200 years ago, it was a horse. It's only recently that it wasn't a horse. Like, it's definitely not a horse anymore. Although it is for some people, but not for most of us. So, yep. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah, we are living in interesting times. Things change so quickly. So join the discussion. We have different topics coming up, of course, as we are moving away from Valar Rereadis temporarily. We will be talking about a variety of scripted topics the next few months before getting back to Valar Rereadis in January with the World of Ice and Fire. You can join us on Facebook or Discord or Twitter or other places. We have plenty of places to hang out. And also want to give some thanks to those of you who support us on Patreon. You can join up through patreon.com/History of Westeros. There's a variety of support levels that come with benefits like bonus episodes. We've got several bonus episodes that you can only get through Patreon or through sending a donation. And Stefan, since we did not have a chance in the review to ask us, I know that you're a big fan of Dunkin' Egg, and it would be a shame to not hear you tell us why you like it so much. So if you want to just take the floor for a minute and maybe things you didn't get to say that you're planning on saying in the episode that we had to reschedule, go ahead.
Yeah, as you already said, I really love the Dunkin' Egg novellas, much more than the historical novellas like the Princess and the Queen and stuff. And there are several reasons for that. On the one hand, they're simply more interesting characters. They are really good characters. Sorry.
No problem.
But I also think that the topics and themes that are developed in these stories are incredibly well contained within this short space of pages that he has in the novella. I mean, we have a lot of themes in the main series as well, but they are developed over hundreds and hundreds of pages. Yeah. And when I see what he gets to cram into a story like The Sworn Sword, I am just on my knees in admiration, on what's going on there. And it's just so much, and on top of a good and entertaining and exciting story, which is what brings me back to these stories time and time again. I don't remember if I even reread all of the other history novellas, because once again, I'm not into them very much, I have to admit. But Dunkin' Egg, I've read like 5, 6, 7 times at least.
Nice.
I also have the graphic novels, which I also like quite a bit.
Really
unlike the graphic novel of the main series, which just sucks. But those are good as well. The audiobook is great, and hopefully we will get a great HBO show about them as well. Maybe.
Hope so. Fingers crossed.
But that is just the most rough overview of what I really like about them. My favorite one is The Sworn Sword. Yeah. I think I'm in. Yeah, I think for many people it's The Sworn Sword. I think.
Yeah.
From what I gather, but the others are also great.
Well, what is it about The Sworn Sword that stands out the most for you? Is it the way it portrays the characters, or just the particular themes that are present there, or the way they deal with dealing with the drought and all that, or just what is it?
I think the most standout thing for me is the whole part about the aftermath of the Battle of the Red Grass Field. Because it is portrayed in such it's a bad word, but realistic manner. I'm feeling very, very touched by it. It feels very real how Sir Eustace is reacting to it, and many of the other peoples, and how it has an impact on these people that is going on for years and years. And then, I mean, the obvious reference point for it is Lost Cause mythos and Confederates against Unionists and all of that stuff. But as a German, for me, it also strikes very close to my heart because, as you might know, we lost World War One, and after we also lost World War II, but we started twice, lost twice, didn't try again, luckily. Yeah. And after World War One, you had this stab in the back legend of people, going around saying, "Oh, we didn't really lose; it was just this betrayal and like magic and arrows from a ridge," and that. Nice. That whole aspect and how it festered in the hearts and created this ever-returning thirst for revenge, for a second try. Wow. The next time we'll do it right, which is basically why we stopped World War II.
Wow.
Because the faction that thinks we could just try over and do it in the right way next time, and that feels very, very true. And it gets me every time.
That is
we went to Vietnam and then we went to Afghanistan. We still don't get it right.
That's a fascinating perspective. Yeah, I never it makes a ton of sense when you hear it. But from our perspective, me and Sean and Shay as Americans, it wouldn't necessarily have crossed our minds in the first place. That's really interesting. Yeah, you're right. We did think of the American Civil War for sure, and of course we would. And but yeah, that's a very different example. Sean, you had a question for Stefan.
Well, I wanted to follow up on that thought also. By the way, that there was a quote. I don't have it ready to go, but I mentioned it in an earlier episode where Dunk, I think it was Dunk remembering Arlen saying something to the effects of, lords and knights wage their wars, but the common folk and the cows go about their business. And on one hand, there's some truth to that, but on the other hand, it's not that simple either.
Yeah.
There are these repercussions across society in the wake of war.
True that.
But yeah, another topic that we had talked about that I wanted to get your perspective on, a thought that I had that I stewed on for a long time, that I'm still stewing on, is there's one big difference between the main series and the Dunk and Egg books is that we're only getting the one perspective, right? And so not only does it keep the story from sprawling so much, which he could get there with 10 more books or something, but also because we only get one perspective, we know more about this one character and their thoughts, but we know less about other characters and their thoughts. If Martin was to have another POV, what might you want? And I want to deny you the easy answers. You can't say egg, you can't say blood raven. Someone else.
It's a little bit difficult because there is no other recurring character that helps us, so we would need to choose one per novella. I think the obvious answer for the Hedge Knight would be Fossaway, Raymond Fossaway, because he is a witness to most of the events. He gives us a different perspective because he's the Lordy person, Lord adjacent person.
Lord adjacent, I like that.
Yes, so I think he would be a nice contrast, still in the same team. I wouldn't want to read Arian's perspective. I think Baylor's perspective would be boring, I guess, and that doesn't leave too much. Tencel maybe, but she isn't there for most of the event, so it makes no sense. The only one that really would make sense is Raymond Foster.
I think that's really interesting. I hadn't considered him. My answer for the first one was maybe the idea. I kind of wanted to see Makar's perspective on this strange young man that he's about to send Egg off with. But I like Fossaway more in terms of significance for the story.
Yeah.
If I could throw another one out that it hadn't occurred to me before, but Steely Pate might be an interesting one. Who would also have been a witness to a lot of events and maybe would have a little more unique perspective. And think of like the memories he might have, what might be interesting lore for the world.
That's true.
I know this is just a made up scenario, but it's possible that a character that we pick here might appear in another book, or could have a single chapter, like a prologue or something. So maybe you could pick like Aemon, or you could pick Tancel, because maybe we'll get here later on or something.
Yeah, I wonder about that, whether there'll ever be one like the Last Kingdom series is entirely from Uhtred's point of view, but there's one chapter that isn't. One chapter.
What point of view is it?
It's from his son's point of view. So
I know the show, but I haven't read it.
So it's technically Uhtred's point of view still, because his son is named Uhtred.
I think when we talk about the Hedge Knight, Martin has written the novellas in a way that we don't really need other viewpoints. Because if I think, what perspective does Steely Pate offer that we don't have already? I mean, that guy is wearing his heart on his sleeve, basically. I mean, the same is true for Raymond Fossaway, basically. I know what this guy feels because he tells us. We also know who Makar is. I think Martin was very clever in how he plotted them out, that we don't need other perspectives.
Yeah.
All the other characters are written in a kind of an obvious manner, which they must be, because Dunk is too dumb to understand them, but we as readers need to understand them for this whole ruse to work, basically.
Yeah.
I generally agree, but I'm kind of gaming the system here because I want to know more about the history. Like these characters that might have been in some past war or served some former lord, we could tie together other pieces.
Yeah, because Steely Pate's much older than Dunk, so I think that's part of what you were thinking, is he'd been around longer.
But I do agree, he did perfectly select the POV
Fossaway,
and the characters, the pieces that he gave us. Yeah,
that's really good. That's a really good choice. Yeah.
Well, what about the other two? If you want to break it up by book?
Oh yeah, what would the other two be?
I think in the Sworn Sword we could. I'm tempted to say Brown Banners,
Oh yeah, yeah. Why not?
but
Why not?
it would just be very unpleasant.
Not as bad as Arian,
be like-
but unpleasant.
It'd be like the Greyjoy chapters.
I'm uncertain if he adds something as a perspective. You know, it is this typical problem that many fantasy novels have that try to imitate what Game of Thrones did. You know, with the dark anti-hero who is just basically an unpleasant person who is violent and an asshole.
Yeah.
And after one or two chapters, I know you are an asshole, and repeating your assholery doesn't give anything new. So
that was interesting about Eustace, by the way. It took some piecing together to realize that he wasn't a hero, that he wasn't someone that Dunk should be looking up to. I appreciate that it was a little subtle and took a while to. I don't even know if after the first read, I still thought of him as being more protagonistic, but now I think of him as being much more antagonistic.
That's interesting. George has made him very gray, huh? So you've gone back and forth on it.
But another
what could be really interesting is Lucas Longinge.
Oh,
yeah.
You know, give us a perspective on the Weber Castle and the intrigue there without giving us revealing any plot information we shouldn't have, and give us basically what they did in Game of Thrones season 6 or 5, where Ramsay was basically getting his, where we were in Ramsay's point of view. I want to become a Bolton, you know, the same thing for Lucas Longinge. Seeing how he frames himself as the hero of the piece might be interesting. Yeah. You know, I'm preserving order, and I have to get this girl who doesn't know what she's doing into hand, and then it comes this troublemaker, and I need to stop him, you know, and then in the end he just loses.
I do like that, because you do see, like, one thing I like is seeing how bad people, like what we judge as bad people, justify their actions, because sometimes they do justify. Sometimes it's not just like, oh, I'm gonna do whatever I want, because like Stefan said, if that's what it was, that wouldn't be that interesting. You know, someone who's just like acting on their impulses all the time, like, you don't need to be in their head for that. But if they are like wrestling with themselves, being like, no, this is okay, because like what Stefan said, like, I'm preserving order, or I'm actually protecting, like, this, I'm doing violence to stave off greater violence, that can be pretty interesting. You can get angry at a POV like that, or occasionally find the occasional nugget that they're actually right about, or something like that.
That's something Martin seems to understand too, is that people, even bad people, aren't just pure evil. They don't kick every puppy they see.
Yeah.
You know, they still have some sort of defining moment or drive or characteristic that might take them down an evil path, but at least in their own mind, they see some justification for it.
Yeah, it's pretty rare to have like Arian or the Mountain or Joffrey. Those
when you have enough characters,
and even the Mountain,
which Martin does.
He does give some.
That's
some
true.
Depth to
even
that,
Joffrey,
in that he's haunted. I mean, he has all of those killer
headaches,
migraines.
Yeah,
but that's going to affect you. I mean,
abusive childhood.
Yeah, you know, not to the extent that maybe Gregor.
Yeah, I think most people with really bad headaches aren't murderers, but it is something.
Yeah, he, even for Gregor, he included that, and like you said, for Ramsay and Joffrey.
Absolutely. So let's move on. Let's see. Oh, actually, no. On the Mystery Night, what would be one?
By the way, a lot of people have also said, and I think the same thing, is Septon Sefton for the Sworn Sword.
Yeah. He would have a lot of insight.
Yeah, a lot of gossip. Yeah.
He would know things, but he wouldn't, like Stefan said, you don't want someone who's too deep in the plot. Like, his information is like world information. Like, he was in King's Landing. That's part of what would make him interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
He could give us fill in the rest of the world, you know, status, if you will.
Yeah, because like someone like Bloodraven, the problem with him is he just knows too much. He violates that George R. R. Martin rule of a character that knows too many things. You can't give him a POV like Littlefinger or Melisandre or whatever. Yeah, just not going to happen. Well, Melisandre, we did get.
Here, Septon Sefton knows too few things.
Yeah.
On the other hand, because there's once again the problem. What does he offer that we don't already know?
Because like the history stuff, he could say out loud,
there's this expositionary dialogue that he has at the table with Dunk, and aside from that information, I don't know what he offers. You know, as a perspective, because the guy he's a jolly guy who likes to drink.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And when we go into the Mystery Knight, we have kind of the same issue, because look at Fireball. We know everything we need to know about Fireball.
Yeah.
The whole drama is already there. We know everything we need to know about Gorman Pike. He's basically completely explored. We do. Do we have any other?
And you
characters
can't
that I
have
would-
anyone who figures it out, because one of the key bits of that story is Dunk doesn't realize what's happening.
Yeah.
And
We
That's
have
the- that's
everything
the
we
problem.
need for this plot, for
Yeah.
this story. But we don't have everything we need for our curiosity about Martin's world.
Yeah.
That's what I'm angling for.
Or, and of course, a fourth, fifth, sixth story could have a setup that that would be lent
Oh,
by,
yeah.
like you said, like an epilogue, like a moment from someone else's point
And
of
of
view.
course,
You know who might be interesting in the Mystery Knight is Walder Frey.
Ah, the little 4-year-old,
That's actually
Yeah.
really nice.
6-year-old, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
But what I was going to point out
think
is
he's
that
4.
not
Yeah.
all POVs. I mean, you get to choose when you put them into action.
Yeah.
You can give us a POV towards the very end once Dunk has figured this out, for example.
That's true. That's true. Like you could
One
end
POV
with,
that I think would be very frustrating and interesting is Alan Cockshaw.
oh God.
Yeah.
His jealousy. He's just overwhelmed by jealousy.
Yeah.
Just when we're talking about, unpleasant POVs, I think his counts.
It might be like being in John Connington's head.
Yeah, a little bit like that. Probably just not so much. At least
Without
his,
his-
at least his is not unrequited.
Right. Yeah. And well, you have some unrequited. You have that sort of in common. Rhaegar's gone, but it's kind of out of sync. Shout out to TKOK Podcast Network. How's it going, friend Tommy? He says, actually catching a live stream again. Pre. Little Forsaken reference there.
Yeah, I asked him to record the pre-line.
So for our audio project Forsaken one, which is work is beginning on or is underway on, we have Tommy's gonna be Pyatt Pre. What a character to be. So let us move into the future of Dunk and Egg. The possibilities are kind of wide open. We're not going to sit here and discuss the future of George R. Martin, because that's a bit ghoulish, and who knows? We can't. We have no idea. There's no place for that. That's not appropriate. But
He's immortal.
He's immortal. But we sort of have an out here, which is that because HBO is considering it, we can imagine that there's a lot of different ways that this could hit the world, either through HBO or far in the future, graphic novels, more books, who knows? So we won't worry too much about how. We'll just know that it's possible. And we'll start off with a quote from George R. Martin first of all, about the novels, and then we'll move on to him talking about show potential. So Sean, hit us up.
Let me make sure I'm not muted here. Okay. It has always been my intent to write a whole series of novellas about Dunk and Egg, chronicling their entire lives. At various times in various interviews, I may have mentioned 7 novellas or 10 or 12, but none of that is set in stone. There will be as many novellas as it takes to tell their tale, start to finish. But only the 3 mentioned have been published to date. I did originally plan on including a 4th in Dangerous Women, the cross-genre anthology Gardner and I put out last year. The book was past due and the story was not finished, so I substituted an abridged version of The Princess and the Queen instead. The unfinished novella was indeed set in Winterfell and involved a group of formidable Stark wives, widows, mothers, and grandmothers that I dubbed the She-Wolves. But the She-Wolves of Winterfell was never meant to be more than a working title. The final title, when I finish the story, will be something different. There's also another Dunk and Egg novella that I've got roughed out in my head with the working title, The Village Hero. That one takes place in the Riverlands. There's no telling when I'll have time to finish either of these or which one I'll write first. Don't expect I will know more until I've delivered The Winds of Winter.
Yeah, that's basically the only thing he's been adamant about, is that he's not sure when he's going to write them, but it won't be till after Winds of Winter at the very least. He has since then clarified that he will good chance he's going to write one of them or both of them before A Dream of Spring, if I remember correctly.
A little palate cleanser,
Yeah. And it might help him work out some ideas, as we alluded to with the She-Wolves when I was referring to Nina's blog post. It's writing the She-Wolves would allow him to potentially help work out some of the issues he plans on having happen at Winterfell when Sansa, Arya, Bran, Andor, Rickon, Jon, whoever, all converge on Winterfell. A little like we saw in the show, but pretty different. But they probably got the idea for all that from George, which is why we expect to see it in the books. So that's pretty cool. Hearing George's old thoughts on that. Do you guys have any reaction to that that quote in particular? I think it's from 2011-ish or 2010. I forget exactly, but it's a good while back.
He's not in the habit of doing this anymore.
Yeah, no, you're right. He just doesn't bother making statements like this anymore.
Wisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate for us, but it's
Yeah.
wise for the fan blowback.
Wisely
I
and
feel.
disappointingly.
Well said. Well point, Sean.
But yeah, just to give thoughts, I think it makes sense. I mean, from my point of view, what I'm seeing, if I look at the first three novellas, is tackling a different genre and a different idea in each and every one of them.
Yeah.
So doing one in which Dunk has to finally enter the political arena and sort out inheritance issues makes a lot of sense. Doing something like The Village Hero, in which he really is a hero, maybe, I don't know, would be a kind of change. There's no telling what the genre exactly would be for the Village Hero, but my feeling is that we are going into different ones with each of these novellas, and different themes. So for example, with the Sworn Sword, we have the Western genre and this whole thing about the past and working through these issues. In the Mystery Knight, you have this whole complex about identity, and so I'm excited to see what happens in the She-Wolves. He will bang old man, I guess.
Yeah.
My question, I feel like out of all the genres, one that he'll hit is romance, which we get a little bit maybe of it in the Mystery Knight, but that's really a mystery. That's truly that's the genre. But in terms of a romance novel or a romantic comedy type thing, I have to wonder about what'll happen between Egg and Beth of Blackwood, and when
Yeah.
things will happen there. Obviously, they're going to meet, you would imagine, in The Village Hero. In terms of genres, that's one of the ones I think of first.
Maybe that's a coming of age romantic. It's like Can't Hardly
Has to
Wait
be.
for.
But yeah, then there's also, of course, I mean, if we're just thinking of genres, like what would be horror?
Yeah. How could they do a
Mm,
horror
yeah.
one? That would be interesting. How could they do horror?
You
in
guys are
Japanese?
hitting on all my notes coming up right now.
Oh,
yes.
Like, almost every thought I've had is like spilling out right now. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm trying
Because
to
we
hold
read your
back.
notes.
Yeah, Sean, what do you think about this?
Well, real quick, let me. I had a thought just on the quote, the thought we were on before I get too deep into the genre thing,
Okay.
which will probably keep popping up anyway.
Yeah.
But we've already talked about the idea that it seemed like, especially the books that he was writing closer together, had a lot of like connecting dots, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the same sort of themes and storylines. It seemed like what he's fleshing out for one is coming out in the other.
Yes.
And so-
especially Clash of Kings to Hedge Knight, like the first one, because it was written
Yeah.
like at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can imagine if, and not only can I imagine, I'm kind of confident that Martin is fleshing out this entire world. That he's not just writing Arya's chapter, right? He's fleshing out the entire history and path of scores and scores of characters over generations. And that allows him to make parallels through history and, relate prior events to what might happen or debts that are owed or on and on and on.
Yeah.
And I expect that he's working on different pieces of Winds and Dream and She-Wolves and on, all at the same time. And here and there, he might try to focus in, commit extra time to one or meet some deadline. But he's got to be working on all this as one big garden, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of expect to get a lot of clues from one of these novellas about what's going to happen in the main series when it come out. Expect
yeah.
and hope.
I think you're totally right. I mean, when Fire and Blood came out, we saw lots of things that looked like groundwork or sandboxing similar ideas that we're seeing here. Lots of examples of that as we went through it. And we'll be looking for them again when we do Valar Rereadis for Fire and Blood eventually. Let's look at this next statement. George talked about the opportunity to put Dunk and Egg on television, first of all, back in 2014. So this is an old quote, and then we'll fast forward to what it looks like now. So it's neat to see what he thought then versus what it looks like now. Sean?
There's been interest, yes, but the rights situation is complicated. Film and television rights to the characters and the 3 published Dunk and Egg stories remain with me at the present. But HBO, when acquiring the rights to the Song of Ice and Fire novels, also acquired film and television rights to the world of Westeros. So if we did Dunk and Egg with anyone else, we would need to remove all the references to House Targaryen, Iron Throne, etc. Not completely impossible, but certainly undesirable. Whereas if HBO decided they wanted to make a Dunk and Egg miniseries or TV movies, they'd first need to buy the stories. That's a much more attractive proposition for all concerned, I think. But if it happens, it will happen years from now. Not tomorrow, not next week.
Well, it has been years from then. That was, as I said, 2014. And Dunk and Egg.
So it must be about to happen.
Yeah, right. Dunk and Egg was first announced to be in early development in January of this year. So it hasn't been a long time, but on the downside, there hasn't really been any more news on it, which isn't a great thing. It's not necessarily bad news, but other projects that are World of Ice and Fire related, Game of Thrones related, have moved forward. So that's also potentially not bad news because maybe those just happened first.
Yeah, there are other projects that already have, writer, showrunner attached to it, whereas Dunk and Egg doesn't even have that yet. So it's definitely, out of all the projects named, I think it's the farthest behind, according to what they've announced.
So,
sigh.
Yeah. So with that, it's interesting. There's maybe not a lot. Obviously, if you any of y'all want to comment on that, feel free. But I mostly just wanted to throw that out there because I thought it was interesting. And from here, what I want to do for most of the rest of the episode is discuss what we know about the timeline, what we know major events are going to be, any tidbits we have from George, the titles of future stories, and just sort of imagine, very sandboxy, play with these ideas, figure out, decide what we want, talk about other genre options. Like Ashaya mentioned romance, we mentioned horror, and just play with all that. And so...
All right. Can I tie in my thoughts from a second ago?
Absolutely.
To preface this, where we're going.
Yeah,
okay. So, one, I wanted to start with a quote, a Martin quote.
Sure.
Another Martin quote. He said, "One of the joys of the Expanse series is the way Jimmy Corey dances between subgenres. The series is certainly science fiction, no doubt of that, but assigning it to any particular subgenre is more difficult. Some parts read like space opera, some parts strike me as hard sci-fi. The first book, Leviathan Wakes, had some pretty strong horror elements with its vomit zombies and a real noirish mystery feel in the Miller chapters. With Babylon's Ashes, however, the war comes to center stage, and we are definitely in the realm of military sci-fi."
Real quick, I just want to say that's one of the things I love about The Expanse is how it captures so many different feels. I mean, Sworn Sword is a Western. Sibyl of Bern has also got that feel to it. So, yes, go on.
And also, I want to say that I love that he calls him Jimmy Corey.
Yeah, Jimmy Corey. He calls them. It's two people.
Them, yeah.
So, Jimmy
James S.A. Corey is not a real person, but can still be given a real person's nickname like Jimmy.
Yeah. So anyway, this one, I guess, this quote for me means brings out a couple things. One, it's something that Martin's paying attention to and appreciates, right? Mm-hmm. And two, that he not just the idea of genres, but like mixing genres and the nuances of subgenres. And thinking about what genres there are, I've thought about this a lot. At this point, I really there's a part of me that wants to kind of be a truist and say there's only like 5 genres and everything else is a subgenre of that. But as more and more things get made and more people are looking and defining or wanting to understand what you're going into better, it makes more sense to have more subgenres. Like, there's such a difference if you say drama between like a courtroom mob movie versus a teenage coming of age. There might be both dramas, but drama doesn't say enough.
What if it's a coming of age young mobster movie? A young mobster coming.
I mean, the Newark, whatever, the Sopranos movie just came. Now, I mean, that's not like a crazy thing to make.
You're right.
When
you
start mixing genres, you get like hundreds. Yeah, it's crazy.
Some of them are harder to put together. Like having a sea monster coming of age is maybe. I don't know if we can relate to that, but.
But if anyone could do it, it's Martin. Yeah. If he gets some young Ironborn as the Kraken attacks the ship, I don't know. But anyway, I was just thinking about how it's I think a particularly good topic for us to ponder because it seems like Martin is pondering it, planning on it even, right? And so I kind of went through the process of like researching genres and trying to define which ones were distinct enough or whatever, and then which ones were more likely to apply to his world. And so, let me think. I have a little list here. Ones I think are likely for him to at least toy with, if not completely center around, to at least tie in or mix together. Horror and connected adjacent horror adjacent is monster movies, which maybe like Aliens or Predator or something like that. But he might do that with. I mean, maybe he's kind of doing that with The Mountain already. But I wonder if he might have some more supernatural elements, some more horror kind of thing. A sea monster, he might have a sea adventure. There may be some kind of
they can
dunk
fight the
out
Greyjoys,
yeah. And sea adventures really can make good stories too, because you're so secluded from the rest of the world.
Oh yeah.
And you can't really leave either, right?
It's the implication.
If he was on
The
a ship with
implication.
you,
Right, Sean?
yes, plus the implications, yeah. But they say Eustace had been a captain of a ship, and Dunk realized, I don't want to follow this guy anymore.
Oh yeah.
We can't just go to row. He's still stuck in
Can't
that
just
ship,
leave.
So
Yeah. Good point.
anyway, there might be some sort of spy adventure, some sort of situation where I don't know, they've got to figure out what that might even be connected to mystery, which we've seen already happening. Serial killer. Dunk at some point might be trying to track someone down. Some of these maybe ways we get to the different proposed titles, but maybe he's a village hero because he kills a serial killer. But
these are good ideas. Yeah.
Gangster, if he ends up in
Sure.
King's Landing, for example, some organized crime. A heist might be. Even heist was almost part of the mystery night.
That's
true.
true.
The egg.
That's true. Yeah.
There could be a disaster is a pretty distinct movie, and maybe that could be Summerhall, or maybe something at sea.
Oh yeah.
Romance, of course. Coming of age. Those are easy ones to see how they get tied in.
Wow.
I wonder if maybe even showbiz
Ha!
if he ever finds Tencel.
We got Bravos going on for that, but why not? Some sort of spin on that. Yeah, a spin off of that. Hey,
They're going to go to Bravos to join some Bravosi plays like Arya does.
Steph.
So I'm hoping to just plant these thoughts as we go through the future ones and think how these might be tied in.
Stefan, how would you respond to these ideas? Like, any of these stand out to you, or anything missing? What do you think?
I mean, there are a lot, a lot of ideas. I don't really see a show business episode, to be honest. That would be
Dunk and Egg Dancers. Come on,
given Dunk's character and skill set, it could only be a comedy, basically.
Yeah, it would be a comedy.
And I don't know if we want that. I see a war episode in some way or the other, Disputed Lands, most likely.
Oh yeah,
something like that. That would make a lot of sense. Romance, definitely, I'm totally down for that. So I think actually these are my favorite two, more or less. Like a real
romance.
Yeah, the war story and the romance, because we had a war in the series proper. We have from the highest level, basically, when we go to the lords like Catelyn or Tyrion, giving us an overview, or even Jon, and we have Arya as basically collateral damage. But Dunk and Egg could give us, the soldier's point of view and war from the ground up.
That's a great
basically,
idea.
I think that is still missing, more or less, in the whole thing. And Martin has written oftentimes about the depiction of war. That he wants to capture both sides, the ugliness of it and the beauty of it. And we have characters talking about it. We have those elements, but we have not yet seen it from a practitioner's side, basically. Because the most likely candidate here, Jaime Lannister, he's not a point of view character when he still is in the thick of it, and after he is not capable anymore. So that there I see a great potential.
Maybe later. No.
But no. And then romance. I think we also do not really have a romance, because Sansa is coming closest to that in a Game of Thrones, and that gets horribly aborted.
Yeah,
and I think playing that straight, basically, with Egg as the most likely protagonist of it, maybe even a double date of sorts, in which both of them are finding someone to love for some reason. That might be really interesting. And
I see that being comedic also, though, by the way.
Yeah, I
Definitely.
see romantic comedy there as well.
Like both of them, neither of them
Yes,
have any
totally.
idea how to talk to a girl, and they're both like giving each other terrible
Yes.
advice or whatever.
To be fair, even when you have an idea of how to talk to a girl, you still don't do it very well.
Yeah, sometimes you're just like, what was I going to say? I thought I was so prepared. Yeah.
They are basically on the same level, you know. Dunk and Egg. I mean, they are age-wise, they're like what 8 years apart,
They're not
7,
far,
something like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, they're not as.
But when we come to emotional maturity, they
Yeah,
are pretty
that's even
close
closer,
together.
yeah.
So that
Once
would
again, I
make
want to point out
absolute
most 13-year-old boys and most 20-year-old boys are not that different.
Yeah, like level of experience isn't that hasn't gained much. Yeah.
I'm a little dubious. It makes so much sense for there to be romance, but I just when you think about it, and maybe I'm not remembering right or categorizing it right, but how much romance has Martin written? I think he kind of steers clear of that.
I mean, if you think of like John and Ygritte, I think counts as romance.
Okay.
He writes
Yeah.
doom
Going
love a lot.
forward, if something happens with John and Dany, that could be romance. Maybe Dany and Drogo is a type of a romance. That's a very specific type of romance novel where they, you know, tame the savage type of man who's the bad boy. Like there is an element of that, but there isn't a lot of true
I shouldn't say
love.
there's no romance, but it's peppered mildly, right? Like,
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, I think all of these Duncan eggs, like specifically, all three of them have had a romance. They've all had a
there's been
central
elements of it
romance
for sure.
with Dunk.
Yeah,
Specifically, Dunk has had a romantic interest in all three.
Yeah. Even if they haven't, none of them have been consummated, but. You know.
Yeah, or if you
But
didn't
none of them would you
realize.
call romance novels.
No.
Right?
No.
Like I do
No.
expect there to be romance, but I think it is fair to call The Sworn Sword a Western. I
Yeah.
think it's reasonable to attach that to it. But maybe romance too. And I guess it probably wouldn't be fair to call it a Western novel. That probably
No,
wouldn't
it
really be fair.
just has a lot
either,
of those
but-
vibes, like it's a strong theme or a strong connection. But yeah, it definitely doesn't tell the whole story. We're going to see examples to fit these in going forward as we move through some of the possible titles. Like, yeah, as we've alluded to, Dunk is a big, attractive man. There's not going to be a shortage of opportunities for him.
Nina points out, and something we've talked about before, is the idea that if Dunk gets together with Daela,
Yeah.
that would be a tragic romance right
Oh,
there.
yeah, it
That
could
would
be.
be consummated, so
Yeah.
it would go further. And it could, of course, also be paired with Egg and Betha
Mm-hmm.
in the double date scenario.
And the old Nan thing wouldn't necessarily
Something-
be tragic. I mean, it might be tragic that they don't get to stay together, but like neither of them die any time
Yeah.
close to that event. You know, they die much later. So
Something I wanted to add while we're at the topic of romance, I would also totally dig, you know, instead of the romantic comedy, him really going full in on the melodrama. I'm seeing a Duncan Egg version of Titanic, basically.
oh,
You know, especially that you mention Della and this aspect of the love that cannot be, etc. You know,
Forbidden
Leonardo
love.
DiCaprio and Kate Winslet vibes all over, and then really going all in with big emotions. You know, like you need to do that full saccharine, full. Full into all the cliches, but with
Wherever
that
you
little
go,
twist.
I
that
will
he
find
does.
you.
Yes, you know,
I love you
but-
forever.
But with that twist that he does, you know, keeping it anchored and real somehow, but also at the same time giving it, you know, young love always has this bigger than vibe. You know,
Yeah,
it
you
is
can
always
see
the
that stuff.
the most important love. I will never find someone else again, and without you, I cannot live, and all of that. And given the nature of how naive Dunk is, and how prone to such feelings,
Oh,
and then you
yeah.
have a very young Egg, like let's say he's 15 at the time or 14, I can really see that working very well.
I agree with you. The more you lay that out, the more it comes into picture and fits really well, given what we already know about these characters and who they are and their ages and their level of experience. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And
when HBO picks this up, I want Whitney Houston for the theme song.
hey, we were just talking about
My
Kevin
dragon will
Costner
go
too.
on.
Matt Reese suggests, to piggyback on prior discussions and his suggestion, the sellsword could be the spy genre potentially, if they go spy on the Blackfyres, like if Dunk were to join the Golden Company, for
Yeah, I think
example.
that's interesting because obviously we think of it as being very much about war
Yeah.
at first glance, but that it can be war and spy, that these can have elements of multiple genres within it.
Yeah.
And I mean, kind of implicitly, I think our guess is that there would be a bit of spying and secrecy in the sellsword. Egg can't be clearly egg.
Yeah, right. And one interesting part about that is maybe if they're going overseas for this, Egg's disguise is a lot less necessary. There's a lot more silver-haired people over there.
Or as we had talked about before, the idea that instead of shaving his head, Egg will dye his hair, making us think of young Griff.
Yeah, it'll even make that even tighter. So I like that thought. Any responses to that from you guys?
No, yeah, I like the idea, and I think there's potential for some sort of spy thriller genre tie-in, but it is also for these two characters to fit that. And so, maybe there is some other perspective that we see, or they're in some totally new land where they wouldn't be recognized.
Yeah,
but
that's why that would make some sense.
I see this only happening by chance, basically, because there's no way that any of them would ever think it's a good idea to go spying on Bloodraven. I mean, Dunk is like, what, 2 meters tall, and Egg is Egg. Those two aren't conspicuous, especially if we post Mystery Night, where a lot of people now know that they are roaming the land. This is just something that would be utterly stupid. So what I could see is basically Dunk hiring as a sellsword and having this, now we are going on a ship and we are going to the Vale to fight on the sister islands or what, and then it is surprise, we are in the disputed lands, we fucked you over. And then they basically need to get out, something like that. Maybe
they could be driven off course by a storm or something like that. That's always
also possible, but it has to be by chance, not on purpose.
Stepstone, maybe they could be in the Stepstones, or because Tarth.
Oh, that would be
Tarth,
beautiful.
like maybe that's how they go to Tarth, because we know they got to go to Tarth. There's a Dunk's
want to
shield
see the
appears in the
Stepstones.
armory, so I want to see the Stepstones too. That's I'm fascinated by what's there. I mean, we hear about all the wars that are there, but we don't really know what is there, like what people. There's like some ancient Rhoynar people living there. There's like pirates living there, but it's pretty vague. Nina makes another suggestion for a live suggestion rather than one left in advance. This is cool. The idea of the Neck making a potential horror story location. Spooky, isolated. I mean, we saw Moat Cailin from Theon's perspective, and it was spooky, isolated, and there were snakes, and she suggested there could be a big alligator or something like that. That'd be a monster, and lizard to be lizard lion, same difference. That's cool. I like that idea. Maybe even interact with the Crannogmen maybe somehow. Like, I wonder. I definitely haven't thought about that one. The Neck. There's definitely potential there.
I'm imagining like a never-ending story swamp that they're trudging through, different creatures they might encounter or people they might encounter. Yeah.
Dunk learns to ride alligators, 1 foot on each, like he's like water skis. Nina says it's also worth keeping in mind the impact of the eventual Fire and Blood Volume 2, assuming it still happens, because George now has the option to catalog and describe the events of the reigns of Aerys the First, Maekar, and Egg in a formal history. In other words, nailed down a lot more of these events that will happen during the lives of Dunk and Egg. I mean, we have a lot of these events already. I've gotten them written down for us to peruse throughout the rest of the episode here. But of course, if he writes Fire and Blood 2, it's going to be a lot more detailed. There'll be a lot more events. For example, Maekar's reign, despite it being him being one of the more well-known kings, his reign, we know like a few important things that happened at the beginning, a lot about the end, and then just a few major events in the middle, but not much else. And there's a lot of reason to think a lot happens during that time. So a lot of empty space for George to still fill in. We've kind of talked about this trip to the north already a little bit, unless Stefan or Sean, anything you wanted to add to potential ideas on the trip. We can talk about she-wolves separately, but as far as anything that might happen on the way, if you have any ideas, just jump in. We have the third Blackfyre Rebellion. That's going to happen in 219. So that's 7 years after the Mystery Night. And Egg is going to be cited for excellence. Excellence, yes. And, sorry. Yandel cites the actions of Aryan Brightflame and notes that the, quote, pretender Hagon the First Blackfyre died in the aftermath of battle slain treacherously after he had given up his sword. It's a popular theory, and certainly one I agree with, that Yandel is hinting that Aerion himself murdered Hagon after he surrendered, which would make Aerion even more of a villain. And that would be something we could potentially see from Dunk's perspective. Basically, if that happens, it would be a really important thing to see. Now, let's pause to talk about that for a minute. I think Third Blackfyre Rebellion is one of the most straightforward events that you can pretty much book it. If it ever happens at all, Dunk and Egg are going to be a part of it. Would you guys agree with that? Is it just, or am I maybe exaggerating? Is it maybe something that they can just show in the past? Like maybe we come in right at the end and be like, okay, the war has already happened. Here we go. Let's deal with the end. Maybe it's just aftermath. Or do you think we're going to like want to go into it? Where do you guys land on this? Stefan, let's start with you.
I think it is seeing it as a given that it will happen as a story if he ever gets that far. I think, yes. The event has been left out so purposefully out of everything else. We know so little about it. He definitely wants to keep his options open on that one. How it exactly will play out, I'm not confident enough in my knowledge to make any guesses.
Right on.
I have to admit.
Okay. Sean, what do you think?
I'm kind of torn. I can easily imagine him skipping past it. He skipped past all the adventures in Dorne. You know that could have easily been a book.
That's true.
And a lot of times he doesn't show us or give us details of battles. You know, we get reports of it after the fact, and so I don't know. I can maybe even I can see him, you know, being deployed somewhere else, if you will. He's on Essos or something when it happens, and just doesn't have the opportunity, which gives Martin the ability to keep mystery around it or not have to commit to details.
Well, we know Egg was part of it. It was kind of hard for Dunk to have not been there if Egg was there, but you're right. It might have been like maybe they only came in near the end. Like maybe they did something really important at the end, but weren't there for a lot of it. It's still possible what you're saying, just with a tweak. But yeah, one idea I had, let me throw this out there for y'all to consider, is considering the idea of the sellsword as one of the stories. The problem with this idea is the sellsword, this would move it up in the timeline, presumably. My idea would be that, let's say, fast forward to after the battle, and you have this spot. One of the most compelling incidents of the Third Blackfyre Rebellion happens immediately afterwards, which is when Bittersteel is captured. We hear that he's fought Bloodraven again in a duel, and presumably Bloodraven wins, or maybe not, because in the first one there wasn't really a winner. You could say Bittersteel won because he took Bloodraven's eye out, but what happened really was he took his eye out. They were still fighting, and then the battle kind of swept them away from each other, so it wasn't really complete. However, with Bittersteel surrendering, what we know happens is he surrenders. There is an argument, especially from Aerion, that he should be executed. For whatever reason, Aerys, perhaps kinslaying, or perhaps wanting to let the rebels know that they won't all be executed if they surrender, he sends Bittersteel to the wall. And in an event worthy of MacGyver or all the greatest escape artists, his friends show up and capture the ship that he's been sent to the wall on and liberate him from captivity and sail back off to the disputed lands, where he resumes leading the Golden Company. Now, we wouldn't see that happen on page because there's no way Dunk and Egg would like be on the ship with him for that. But all this decision, all this debate about what to do with him and how to treat this captive, who's also a member of their family, strikes me as something that would be a really useful lesson, because a lot of what's a recurring theme within the Dunk and Egg series is setting up Egg as a king and setting up Dunk as a Kingsguard, and how they're going to face much larger decisions. Like the dispute between the water rights is an example of that, or if they go to the north and involve themselves in a succession crisis. Like, these are the kind of things that Egg would have to deal with as a king, but on a larger scale with more authority. So whether or not to execute a rebel, that strikes me as a really important case that could set the stage for how he rules. So that was a bit of a lengthy explanation, but I'd love to hear what you guys think about that idea, even if it's not that particular idea, just that concept. Sean, we'll start with you this time. Sean?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that's already come up a couple times. I think this idea of, Bloodraven wasn't so sure he wanted to execute Daemon, right? And we've talked about the idea of like, if you're too ruthless towards your enemies, then they're less likely to surrender, and on and on. You could see all the sort of factors going into this that Egg might have to consider, that Egg may observe other people's.
Sean froze.
Oh.
Well, Sean, you're back. I can't hear you anymore though. He's clearly leaving and coming back because there's issues. All right, continue. Aziz.
Well, Stefan, let's hear from you then, since Sean, his connection dropped out. What do you think about this concept, or this general idea, or this decision process for a king or for a council?
He's muted too.
I think it's absolutely true that what we see here is the training of a future king, basically in all these scenarios. From the knowledge, like the water ride stuff, down to the question of character, and we also obviously need to set up, for example, for his reforms that he will do later. So yes, maybe the handling of traitors is something that will come up, and I'm not quite certain if a story about Bloodraven, basically, and his being sent to the wall is in the cards for that, and if it is interesting enough. I'm also not sure if Egg. It is really hard to plot this out in that detail.
Something to compare it to, by the way, is that we have this idea here of Bittersteel being sent to the wall, and then we're going to have 14 years later, Egg is going to send Bloodraven to the wall after his treachery with Aenys Blackfyre. So it is. There's two possibilities for this, and the second event could potentially look back on the first as like, well, this is what we did back then, and that was a mistake, or that was smart, or yeah. So it's kind of interesting, a little history repeating itself, potential there.
I think I'm back. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say that it not only is this like, does it weave together all sorts of plots and potential plots, or set up these dilemmas and these characters and these decisions for Egg, but it's also interesting moral discussion too, like what's appropriate punishments, retribution, precedent setting, et cetera, so
Right on.
I hope that this is an element of the stories.
Hey, now here's a general question I have for you guys. It's maybe too hard to predict, but would you guess that George is going to focus more on their early lives or on their later lives, or maybe just kind of a balance between both? Because it feels like there's a lot of events here in the reign of Aerys, and then plenty more later. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it's an answerable question, but I want to throw it out there anyway. Sean, start with you this time. What do you think about that?
I mean, I'm torn. I want to say he's going to focus more on the interesting parts of their lives, if that makes
Which
sense.
may not always be the interesting events, but a lot of times it will be, yeah.
Right. And I think that more often is the earlier parts of your life. I think the older you get, the more likely you are to get into routines of life. Does that make sense?
Oh.
Where when you're younger, you're more likely to be traveling new places and trying new things and having crazy events happen. You're more likely to go off to war when you're 22 than when you're 52. Now a Kingsguard and a king are more likely to have more interesting things happen later in their lives, because they'll be their routine will involve deciding what country to go to war against, or like
they won't be able to travel as much. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Like,
True,
that's
yeah.
one of the reasons I thought about it, is Egg will be a lot less capable of going wherever he wants when he has these responsibilities.
Let me tie this back into the other idea of genre. Is I didn't even mention this one before, but courtroom drama is a pretty established one,
true.
And you could sort of get that. There was a little piece of that even in the Hedge Knight, when the council's kind of meeting to decide what to do about Dunk and his crime and his challenge to trial by combat. Well, I went trial by 7. And that's sort of like a courtroom drama, and it's one of the more interesting parts when you get these lords together trying to make a decision. That conversation they have is very interesting and revealing, and you might get a lot of that when we have these captured rebels. You might have these
Oh, yeah.
meetings of adjudicators trying to decide how to proceed, what to do, what the law is, what precedent they should establish, and so on. So
True. All right. Yeah. Good point. And what about you, Stefan? What do you think about this one?
Mute. You're muted.
oh, Stefan, we can't hear you.
My gut feeling is that we are having the biggest part of these stories in the early part of their lives. But it's really just a gut feeling, because I definitely see what you're saying, Sean. There is a lot of potential in the latest stuff. It's just, I guess, based more on it being complementary to the story proper. Like A Song of Ice and Fire has kids characters. Like we have Bran, we have Arya, we have Sansa, and Jon, obviously. And we have a lot of adult actors, like Tyrion, who is in his late 20s, and then we have Catelyn and Eddard in their mid-30s. And basically, the spot between is still open. So this allows Martin once again to explore something that he cannot explore, like with my war story. Basically, it's a complementary thing to the main series, but that doesn't need to be the driving animus. It's just this gut feeling that I have that he does not want to be redundant.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of decision drama, of politics, etc. in the main series, and so I'm always coming at it from the angle of what can Duncan Egg offer that is not done by any POV in the main series, and we have a lot of POVs in the main series. So that's my line of thinking. If it's correct, no clue.
Honestly, one of the things I think of first when you talk about you're talking about ages and the difference in children and adults and all that is we've been talking about coming of age tales, and yeah, technically in A Song of Ice and Fire, characters come of age, but I'm saying that in quotes because they're not normal circumstances that they're coming of age.
Yeah.
Whereas Egg
Right.
here, this is conceivably about as normal, as good as a coming of age story could be, I suppose.
Yeah.
Let me just throw another random thing out there, because the 5-year gap, the infamous one.
Yeah.
Martin never managed to get it working, and Jeff has laid it out in another cast episode very well why it was a bad idea. But Duncan Egg basically gives him the chance to write exactly that. One of the plans that Martin had, according to Jeff at one point, was to actually write out the 5-year gap in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, just basically with a more compressed time. Like writing 5 years in this 1/2 books, and this is something that he could return to with Duncan Egg, because here it actually could work.
Yeah. That's true. You have far fewer
When you
characters.
don't have to cover as many POVs, it's a little easier. Yeah.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah, and here he could do exactly that, because the children in A Game of Thrones, they are basically too young. Martin has commented on that himself.
Yeah.
Dany is like, 13? Jon is 14 or 15. Robb is the same age. Sansa is 12. We have all, I think, cringed on Arya's kiss with Raph the Sweetling and Mercy. And so what he can do with Duncan Egg is to get a little bit more age appropriate. If you get my meaning.
Yeah, he doesn't have to do that twice.
Just stretch out the whole process of the learning of all of that stuff over a more believable time period than he can do in A Song of Ice and Fire. Because here he can just do like 4 months later or 1.5 years later. And it all works out.
Yeah, in fact, he's already done. Yeah, he already did 1.5 years later between the first two. Yeah, that's right. That's probably what you meant. Yeah.
I just want to follow up on something Stefan said about him not wanting to be redundant. Like, some of the scenarios that characters might go through might be similar, but you don't want to put similar characters through similar scenarios.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So if you have like some sort of political challenge for Jon Snow and some sort of political challenge for Ramsay Snow, right? Then those are going to play out differently or bring out different aspects. Dunk is very similar to Jon, and he is a little bit more, forthright, naive, or whatever. So you don't want him going through those same dilemmas. That is a new angle for me to start thinking.
That's
about
a really
things.
good point. Yeah. So if Dunk was older, he would approach them differently, or will approach them differently, assuming. Speaking of coming of age, speaking of romance, at 220. The year 220, so the year after the Third Blackfyre Rebellion, that's when Egg marries Betha Blackwood. Not when he meets her, that's when he marries her. So they presumably have already met at this point, although they could meet and marry in roughly the same encounter, like within a span of one story, meet and get married all around this 220 date. So that's
not
particularly
my
interesting.
choice. I like to think that he meets her and they're much younger.
Yeah, I agree.
And
I prefer that
then,
too.
Things go differently as they go through puberty.
Yeah, I absolutely prefer that as well. They would be late in their late teens at this point, so it's not like they're young, but they're young. They're not cringe.
And it's a
young.
marriage for love.
Yeah, it is a marriage for love, so that's important. You're right. So as far as our opportunity for romance, we should take a long look at this one. Like, very strong possibility here, and that's why y'all were mentioning things like double date. Maybe Dunk meets somebody here as well at the same time.
Well, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Dela,
Yeah.
Tarth. That if this happens to coincide with going.
Yeah, because he doesn't have to meet her at Raventree Hall or in that area. Probably will. Like, the Village Hero is a very strong option for her and him to meet because, well, Village. Well, we've got a few ideas for that. We'll get to that in a second. Actually, no.
Let me ask you guys.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys as the experts, do we know if the marriage is a happy one? I have no clue.
I believe it's mostly a happy marriage, though
They have a
they
good
do
amount of
have some
kids.
problems. Yeah, they do have some. They do have some issues with. I believe with the marriages and how to handle, like, in the future.
Yeah, that I
But
know.
Early
but,
on, yeah, I think early on it's very good. I think, because I think the early part of their marriage is very strong. But there is room for that to not be so straightforward. But the vibe we've gotten so far is that, yeah. But you're right, it's not strongly specified one way or the other. So a few other events, and then we'll circle back to talk about Betha Blackwood and the Village Hero and more things that we know, certainly. The year after that is when Maekar becomes king, so Aerys the First dies. And that's fairly significant. There's a good chance that gets documented. Dunk and Egg might have to go somewhere, be at the coronation. I'm not sure. 2 years into Maekar's reign is the start of a 7-year winter. I mean, whoa, right? So it's pretty much the entirety of Maekar's reign because he rules for 12 years. So that's the largest. More than half of his reign is filled with this horrible winter. And then after the winter, there's a really long summer. There was a really long summer. So we've got all this.
That long winter, by the way, that's what Maekar gets for killing his brother. Just ask any common folk; they all know.
But then there's another really long winter, starting in 231, 236. So it's really bad. There's just so much winter during this phase. Which, again, if you're thinking of George sandboxing ideas for later, it's pretty straightforward that he could delve into things like how does Maekar feed the realm and how does he manage all this. And since Maekar is so similar to Stannis, and Stannis is currently running things in the north, sorta, the possibilities for parallels are legion. I mean, they're massive here. Obviously, we're not going to have White Walkers during Maekar's reign. Probably won't have any zombies either, but the problems of feeding the realm and managing like a disaster thing, that's a pretty big deal. Do you guys have any responses to that?
It's hard to make it an interesting story is the problem.
That's
right?
a more long-term thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like it's something that is interested as I am in it. It's the thing I am way more interested in, the logistical challenges of leadership than in the details of some sword fight, right?
Yeah.
But I also know it's not as entertaining or appealing to audiences as an intriguing story. So I feel like it's more likely for that to be mostly skipped over. I think that's a time when he could do a time jump. And it also makes sense because it's less likely in that time period for big events to happen. It's less likely during the winter for there to also be some battle or some other big moving piece, some adventure by Dunk. Maybe it is a time when they fall in love. Maybe when they're like huddled up in a castle for months at a time because it's too cold to go outside. That's when they like.
Is that during this time period, Egg has married Betha and they're churning out kids.
Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah.
I need to correct myself real quick. I just realized my notes are wrong. I said start of 7-year winter in 223-24. It's the start of a 7-year summer. Summer. I'm totally
well, then
wrong.
everything I said is almost opposite.
Yeah, it is opposite. Yeah, my notes are just wrong. No one pointed that out. I just sat sitting here realizing, wait a minute, that's not right. There's the super long winter that comes 231 to 236 that culminates with the fourth Blackfyre rebellion. As soon as the winter fades,
Yeah, you just had it backwards. You said winter, then summer.
Yeah. So it's most of Maekar's reign is a summer, but it is the winter does hit during his reign. He's still alive. He dies during the winter. It's during the peak rebellion, and winter is raging, and he dies during it. So this is still, everything we said is still valid. It's just a shorter period, and it starts to bleed into when Egg is ruler, and not just when Maekar is ruler. So that also changes that. So instead, the question is, how would they manage a long summer? And that is even perhaps potentially more likely to get skipped over because we've already seen this drought thing. What do you think, Stefan?
I also think the long summer we had in a Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we saw how that works. There is food aplenty. It is nice. Everyone's happy. There is relatively little conflict because everything is so abundant. So it's usually just this golden age thing. And yeah, sure, you can do conflict in there. That's not a problem. But yes, that is the period that cries out, "Skip me." The most.
One thing let me throw out there, one detail that I mostly agree with you. One detail that adds a little more interest to this time period is that people started talking about it as the great summer, the summer without end. Like that started to become a rumor or thing that people talked about because the summer lasted for so long. So presumably that would be towards the end of it. Like people wouldn't start talking about that in year one. But after 6-7 years of summer, people are like, is this the summer that never ends? That could put the realm into a bit of a weird spot where you get like religious people kind of, the end is this or the blah blah blah. So
I mean, it seems like they would think it was good more than bad.
Yeah,
it would be
you're right.
nothing but good for Maekar's reign at first.
That's a good point.
It's like kids are being popped out by Maekar's kids. Eggs during this whole time period. He's just like they have like 5 children during this summer.
Yeah, and I guess if you have that time of extreme plenty, the time of when it all comes crashing down with that nasty winter, really, that might be the.
Is that much worse?
Yeah. So yeah, Sean, what do you think?
People were lulled into a false sense of security. The idea of storing up grain is like,
it's the summer that never ends. Yeah, it could cause them to get sloppy or to not think ahead. Yes. Another event around the same time, we're not sure exactly when, but in the 220s. So during this long summer comes the gray plague in Old Town that Pycelle described to Ned, like really early in a Game of Thrones. And Pycelle uses it as an example of the Lord Hightower at the town was Quentin, and he was like Tywin. He's like, well, that guy did what needed to be done. He shut the gates to Old Town, wouldn't let anyone out, so the plague would run its course and keep it from spreading. And then they killed him because they hated him for the quarantine, even though it was the right thing to do. So
you were asking earlier what horror story we could tell. There you have one.
Oh wow!
Think Chernobyl in Old Town, basically
being stuck inside.
And
Old
it's also
Town.
another example of how we're talking about George working things out or thinking about things for the main series. This is exactly something like
protecting
that.
the people.
Yeah, or maybe working with.
Yeah, but really, I mean, we don't know how long this quarantine is, right? But it has to be weeks.
Yeah, it has to be. It's substantial. Yeah, very much.
Weeks in which people die on the streets with an incredibly contagious disease that is horrible to get. I mean, there you have a horror setting. And if it's even set in, is it set in summer?
Yeah, mid to late 220s, right when we were talking about that summer. Yeah,
right, you have suffocating heat on the top of it.
Yeah, because Pycelle lived there at the time. Like he was at the Citadel then. So yeah,
and
hot.
So of course, we have Aemon was there too.
Yeah, and Aemon would have been there too. So they'd have maybe another.
You have to imagine Aemon would try to help people more than the average person, just because he, Targaryen exceptionalism. He would think, I'm not going to get sick.
Yeah,
Aemon would probably be, pretty deep in the action.
Interesting.
Same with, I mean, if Dunk and Egg were part of things too, and that's how we would be seeing it. But if they were, Egg would be similar. You would think that Egg would be out among the people.
He might be. Yeah, he might do some
but
shades of Dany.
Dany did the same thing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. He could have shades of that. That's a really, really strong potential for parallels there, yeah. Yet another possible horror story. The fall of House Lawston happens in the early 230s. And Houth Lawston, we have Danelle Lawston, who supposedly turned to the black arts, and we have all these rumors that are almost certainly exaggerated, like sending bats to steal children. Like, I kind of doubt that happened, but still, you can have horror where the monstrous elements are meant to be.
Or it's Scooby Doo.
Yeah,
Pull off the
that
mask
could
and
be
like,
sort
oh.
of that could be inverted, where it's like, oh, she's not really a monster, but people believe she is, something like that. Yeah, it's like, who is it really? It's not Danelle Lawston. It's actually Paris
It's
R.
actually
Martin.
public perception of
Yeah.
a woman in power with
Yeah.
red hair.
Exactly. You have so many things. It's a great opportunity for deconstruction of all the bias against women in power, all the prejudice against women in power. Like, she bathes in blood. Well, she has red hair. Are you sure that's not just red hair dye? You know, we've brought that up a few times, but like, yeah. So, again, very possible. The opportunity for Duncan Egg to go to Harrenhal. I mean, yeah, like horror story, another possibility there. What does that? What does this idea do for you guys? You think this is maybe not as good as some of the other ones, or
I don't think it's likely.
you don't think it's likely?
I'll just
Too
go on
small?
the
Too
record.
small of a story?
Too small of a story. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I would love to see Danelle Lawston, but I don't really see it as significant enough
Okay.
to dunk an egg themselves.
Maybe I'm too hopeful just because she showed up. It
Yeah,
was
exactly.
like maybe
she
that's
does
just
show
she
up,
did
and you
appear,
could, yeah,
but
you
that
could look at that.
doesn't
as
mean much. Just showing
foreshadowing that he'll look back and be like, "Oh, Danelle Lawston had showed up back then."
up.
It is possible. I would kind of like it, but there's a lot of other stories I'd rather learn about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't think being too small is a reason for George to not do it. If he wants to write a horror short story,
Yeah.
and he's got these characters and a setting for it, like this is a way for him to play around with story ideas that he wants to do, as much as it is what we want it to be, a way to flesh out the world of Westeros or whatever. But he still can have this itch to write these certain genres of stories. So
It could be more of the education of a king stuff when you have a vassal that does things like this. How do you handle it? Like perception versus reality. Like, what does Egg do? I don't know. What do you think, Stefan?
It depends a bit if you get a new angle on Harrenhal, because we have a lot of horror in Harrenhal, in the Clash of Kings, and the Stone of Swords. And can you top that with the fall of House Lawston?
Well, if anyone can do it, George can. But I agree. Maybe it's
Yeah,
a
sure,
challenge. Maybe
sure.
it's.
or can you amend that, if not top it? You know, can you?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
that
I'm
out.
not sure if we can get a great horror story out of it, because, I mean, Harrenhal is still given to a new house, and it's not like anyone is talking about the curse as more profound afterwards.
That's
And
true.
if Duncan Egg really experience horror in Harrenhal, I don't assume that they will just go over to business as usual with this castle.
Yeah. I feel like it would be the deconstruction of it might be more in line, or the stuff about deconstruction of sexism, I think, might be more of a likely topic, if that's what George goes with at all. Okay, so moving on. One thing that's huge during Maekar's reign is Egg having children. Almost all, or potentially all of Egg's kids, some of the dates are uncertain, are born in this range. And he has 5 of them with Betha. Duncan the Small, a.k.a. Duncan Prince of Dragonflies, is born somewhere in the time frame of 220 to 224.
So within 4 years of them getting married, they popped out a kid.
Yeah, possibly right away. So, but yeah, at the longest 4 years. And then it's like a steady stream of kids for a little while. They got Jaehaerys born in 225. Shera married in 226. Daron
Born.
married in 228.
Born.
Sorry, born. Yes, my bad. Jaehaerys born in 225. Shera 226. Daron born in 228. And then Raelle, who is the one that marries Ormond Baratheon, the one who's grandmother of Robert, Stannis, and Renly, she is born in somewhere between 229 and 233.
So yeah, she's the one who technically, as Egg ascended, he might have also been having a child.
Yeah. Daron is the one who would have been Olenna Tyrell's husband, or Olenna Redwine's husband. And in the year 230, this one, I'm not so sure Duncan Egg will be involved in any way, but it's something that's going to probably pop up as a mention in one of their stories, if not be directly involved in. Rohan's disappearance in the year 230. So it's about 2 years after Daron is born, around the time Raelle is born, Rohan disappears. So I wonder if that's going to be relevant to them or just something they kind of think about, or because I kind of doubt they'll be involved, but maybe I'm not thinking through it properly. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
That's totally going to be the murder mystery episode.
Oh, kidnapping, disappearance, missing persons case, cold case, Westeros. 2 years later, Aerion drinks Wildfire. I kind of doubt they're involved in that anyway, but boy, that's an interesting event, and I really maybe it's just as simple as it sounds. Like he just drinks Wildfire because he's a crazy person, but maybe someone encouraged him to do it. Like he was drunk and they egged him on. I don't know. Probably not. He's just crazy.
Egged him on.
Egged him on.
Yeah, couldn't help myself.
Egg is definitely pro Aerion drinking Wildfire.
Yeah, he's like, do it, brother. Drink that. Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Drink
you
it,
had
drink
a
it. It's right
you had a
there.
dream about? Yeah, drink it.
Good one, Sean.
Nah, I
It's
mean,
right there.
he's in exile. I think we know that.
By then,
he
he's-
does it while he's in
by then
exile.
He's back by then. He does it at King's
Oh,
Landing.
he
yeah,
is?
yeah.
Okay.
Because he participates in the third
Yeah, but-
Blackfyre rebellion. He fights in it. Yeah.
It still sounds like this event to me where someone mentions it and he is just like, okay. I mean, he is not going to be distraught. He is not going to be overjoyed because by then Aerion is just old news and stale. So I don't see this becoming a major topic.
I don't know. It would
in
be pretty
one of the stories.
major.
It depends,
It,
yeah, the
it would
timeline.
change things from. I mean, Egg inherits because Aerion is dead.
Well, the question is whether or not Daron is dead by that point. He probably is, but he might not be.
Well,
Daron's
they-
death is open. Like, when does Daron the
They
Drunken
both
die?
die
We
by
don't know.
233, and
Yeah.
if Aerion dies in 232,
Yeah,
then-
Darren's probably dead by then.
yeah,
You're
probably,
right. Probably dead by
or
then.
at least they die around the same time. But either way, that's one less person, one fewer person that is in Egg's way.
Yeah, it creates a potential succession crisis. Not crisis, but a succession situation, which apparently is never resolved, because otherwise it wouldn't have been so confusing when Maekar died, which is the following year. Like, there wouldn't have been a great council if this issue had been settled before Maekar's death. So I think it was something that was up in the air when Maekar died, which probably gave a lot of people a lot of anxiety when Maekar's like, yes, I'm going to lead from the front, even though I don't have a specified heir. So the peak uprising is the next major event. Now that I've said that, the year 233. One of the major events.
Real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, do we know any details of Aerion drinking that Wildfire? Is there any
Other than, okay, here's a detail.
anything surrounding the scenario or context for it?
Not the event itself. The only thing that I would say is super important to keep in mind is that Aemon claims all his brothers died dreaming of dragons, so there could be dragon dreams related to his incentive here. He may have dreamed of something here, kind of like how Aerys thought that blowing up King's Landing would turn him into a dragon, right? Like, that's kind of similar, right? They both involve wildfire, right? Like, and they weren't that far apart, like 50 some years apart. So, and we have Summerhall, which also involves wildfire. So, like, this wildfire theme is
It's also
peculiar.
worth noting that I suppose that in the same year that Aerion died, he had a son, and
yeah,
son
he
is
did have
passed over. But there was more happening there in terms of Targaryen kids being born.
Yeah, that's true. So there's a lot of potential there for storytelling, like this.
There's some potential that he was having dreams, right? That he was
yeah,
supposed to
absolutely.
do this, and maybe misinterpreting or juxtaposing.
Or he was supposed
but-
to do it because even his dreams wanted him to die.
Yeah.
Even his dreams hated him.
I'm remembering this moment when I was in the army, and we had the platoon sergeant and the lieutenant were kind of like egging each other on, who's more manly or whatever, and chewing tobacco is pretty common in the military because in the field you can't smoke cigarettes because the light discipline. You could see a lit cigarette from miles away in the dark. So people who are addicted to nicotine, they chew tobacco instead. So these spit cups sitting there, and they're like, if you're a real man, you drink your spit, your
Ugh.
tobacco. And he just didn't blink an eye. The sergeant just picked it up, chugged it down. And then
What
as
the
quickly
hell?
as he did that, he just turned green, puked it right back
I'm pretty
up.
sure that's like a lot of us in the audience right now. Is we're just
Yeah, we just did that
cringed
without
and-
actually drinking it. We still turned.
Oh.
But
green.
could Aerion have been bold or crazy or egged or
Well, we know he was
if
crazy.
someone's like, yeah, like why don't you drink that wildfire if you're so like
That-
a real Targaryen could do it? You know,
That's
like I wonder
that's what
if
I'm saying. I think he might have been. It's entirely possible. Like he's drunk. He's unstable. So yeah, who knows? I don't know.
his honor's been slighted already or something, and yeah.
Yeah, you never know. And he's going to be a lot older by this point. Like we've seen Aerion, we know he's awful, but we saw him in the year 209. This is 23 years later. So it's not that he's going to be a good person by then, but he's going to have changed a little bit, if not more. He's still going to be violent and cruel and all that. But so that's another thing that adds a lot of fascination, a lot of storytelling possibility, a lot of conflict, and potentially raises a new theme or new story idea is his personal tragedy. And this also ties into the Rohan disappearance. Okay, so a reason they might actually get involved in that is that all of a sudden, not long after that, or maybe not long before that, Egg, has one of Rohan's sons as his squire. So Tion Lannister is Egg's squire at the time.
What's that name?
Tion. Yeah.
Okay, this is new to me. I didn't know this little bit.
And Tion dies during the Peak Uprising at the same time his father dies. So both Tion and Maekar die storming Starpike or besieging Starpike. So that's pretty bad. Like that's a huge loss for him. And it could be combined into the Great Council, which is in the same year, which results in him being crowned Aegon V. And Nina adds a thought here. This could be the legal drama thing where, we have who's going to be king. You got to hash all that out. And of course, Michelle, you think of...
Yeah, it made me think of if we see a council for Bran, that this is hashing out that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. Good call.
And especially because Bran's mentor is Bloodraven, and the actual leader of this great council in 233 is Hand of the King, Bloodraven. So it's like, whoa, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm just a little bit skeptical that we will actually see the council.
Yeah, it's possible. we won't.
That Egg will be present at the council itself. I don't know, at least for the deliberation process of it. And Dunk is just such an unsuited character to give us the political drama of it.
That's a good point.
But
that's
there
a little
could
bit.
be people who were in a council could come talk to Egg about it. We could get a scene or multiple scenes of him being updated.
I don't think we will see the council itself as it plays out.
Okay. Yeah, there'd be a way for him to
sense.
play around it without showing it directly, maybe, or.
I mean,
I mean,
just imagine
do we think-
Sam's first chapter in the Storm of Swords, like from the structure with the flashbacks. That could be how this works out, basically, by people giving us over the course of a story that's ostensibly about something else. People give us piece by piece what happened at the council. That is a structure that I can imagine.
That sounds cool. What were you going to say, Shea?
Oh, I was just going to ask, do we think that all the candidates were there at the Great Council, or do they have the deliberations separate?
Well, some of the candidates were like babies, so that's the
Yeah,
problem. So
obviously.
they wouldn't need to be present, but
I think about, say, when they were trying to decide who would inherit in the original. Whoa.
like Aemon probably wasn't there, and he was a candidate. But
Yeah, well, I was trying to think about like Rhaenys, the queen who never was, back in
Yeah,
that council. Like, I
yeah.
think she was there to press her claim.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think anyone who could be would want to be.
And so
right?
Egg, I think, would be there. The point about Dunk not being there makes sense. Although, again, if Egg has a personal bodyguard,
It also depends on if he's in the Kingsguard by then or not.
Yeah.
No. I don't want to be misunderstood. I think that he is there because of the pressing of the claim. We also know that the Blackfyre heir is specifically invited to press his claim.
Yeah.
But I don't think Egg will be present for the deliberations.
Okay.
And that is the point. I think.
For the voting, I see. For the actual, he doesn't get to cast a vote. He's a candidate.
And for the whole deliberation process, because how are these people going to discuss this stuff if the claimants themselves are present? This is just weird.
Yeah.
And how can you, as a lord, deliberate with your peers about who not to choose? If that person is there and after that he gets chosen, that's just bad.
Sometimes
Yeah.
the person that's going to be chosen is one of the people that deserves to have a vote.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
sometimes they are already a lord and they deserve to weigh in on this matter.
That's a good point. Yeah.
The fact that all this intrigue exists is why I'm so sure we'll get it in some form, right? Because all these things we're saying, like there are certain people who would want to be present, not only because they'd want to make their case, but like you're saying, because it's going to be hard for someone to speak against them.
Right, now,
what are you going to do after? Yeah.
Here's where Stefan could be
One
right,
way-
is it could be, this is one of those things that I agree with you, this has to be sorted out one way or the other. But it could be sorted out in Fire and Blood 2 rather than Dunk and Egg. Just going to throw that out there as a possibility.
One way or the other, I know I would want to be in the room where it happens.
Yeah.
Where it happens.
Totally with you there, man.
Absolutely.
Couple points from some of the commenters here. Julie A says a religious uprising would be another possible theme to explore, or religious conversion, or just entertaining the idea of adopting the faith or grappling with the notion of faith. That's a really good point, especially as it pertains to knighthood.
Yeah, and Dornish Dame adds, this is why I grabbed it, and says this is maybe something to explore through Egg and Betha's marriage with her worshiping the old gods. They're going
Nice.
to have a set of children
Yes.
who, like Ned and Catelyn, are going to be familiar with both the Faith of the Seven and the old gods and dragon dreams.
Great
really.
point. Yeah.
Um,
Multiple religions there. Yeah.
So that is definitely there's no way that can't be something that they deal with. That isn't going to just be basic. Like there are going to be people who care about the fact that there is an old gods worshiper as their queen.
Great point. Yeah. Great point. Apparently she was a popular enough queen that it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big problem, but it was probably a problem for a few people. That may have been part of the argument. I imagine that gets brought up at the Great Council. Like some septons might argue against. It's one of the reasons that people argue against him is because of his he's so tied to the lowborn people. His attention to commoners and all that. That made some nobles
The Blackwood
wary.
thing will be bad. Will be very bad compared to Bloodraven as well.
Yeah.
And they're like, that's another Blackwood comparison. Of course, Bloodraven is
Yeah.
biased.
Good point. Good point. So yeah, Betha and Bloodraven's kinship. I doubt they know each other really well, but yeah, they're from the same family. That's absolutely relevant. The Brackens would certainly be against it, wherever they are.
How old is Egg when this council is happening?
Well, it's
He would be
233,
like 33.
so he would be about
Okay,
33,
well
or
grown.
31 maybe.
Yeah, they're right.
So, because I think Aemon's born in 198, and I think Egg was 2 to 3 years after that. So yeah. Now, Duncan joins the Kingsguard at some point. We don't know. At the latest, it's 236, because he's definitely in the Kingsguard by 236. Probably has already been in it for a little while. Most certainly, he's in it at least by the time Egg is king. I'm guessing he made it before that.
Egg becomes king, and he's like, "Snap! I'm
like,
making you a Kingsguard."
Insta Kingsguard. Of course, there's
But
not
I
always a
think
slot open.
Yeah, I think it's very likely that it happens after he distinguishes himself in the Blackfyre Rebellion.
Yeah, I feel like Makar would have named him to the Kingsguard.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially like then you have like a prestigious Kingsguard taking your son around.
But he's definitely not Lord Commander by this point. That is absolutely later. So we're not sure about that. So I realized I made another small mistake here. Tion wasn't killed at during the Peak Uprising. He becomes squire to Egg around the time. He's killed in the year of the Red Spring, which is 3 years later. That is during the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion. So
6 years after his mother disappeared.
yeah, so 6 years after his mother disappears, 3 years after he becomes king. And this is not much of a rebellion. The Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion maybe doesn't need to be told as far as the war part. The war part is not very interesting. It's over so quickly. The thinking seems to be there was that really long winter, 5-year winter, then the Blackfyres invade as soon as the winter's over. And this is called the Year of the Red Spring, which is confusing because it's the second year of the Red Spring. There's a Year of the Red Spring in the year 120 that's part of setting up the Dance of the Dragons. It's the year Laena dies and in childbirth. And so Tion is killed in this battle, and Dunk personally kills Daemon III Blackfyre. And in like the first battle of the war, which, well, that went quickly, didn't it? So that was also the end of the war. So that I'm not sure about, because it's interesting because the war itself sounds pretty not that interesting. But the loss of Tion could be interesting, and the other events of the Year of the Red Spring, because it was a really disastrous year. Lots of things go badly. Egg's first real challenge as king. That's a potential idea for a compelling story, or is that compelling? I'm not sure. I think it would. I mean, when we say something like that, it's always George can make anything compelling. Like if you give him enough time or leeway, he's that good. But that doesn't mean he's going to start off, working uphill. Start off with something that's already really interesting.
For me, it's like, we will have seen a lot of Blackfyre rebellions and war and stuff by this point, but going forward is obviously that Dunk kills Daemon the Third and that Tion dies, because I think those are two things that would have a lot of emotional resonance for both of them, because Dunk, he knew and liked Daemon the Second, that he presumably they might have interacted again in King's Landing, probably
that's a
not
great
Dunk,
point.
but whatever there. But Tion's death would have been certainly significant for Egg, because that's his squire that died.
Yeah, and Dunk would probably know Tion too.
And that's Rohan's son. I think that his death would definitely upset them.
Probably the biggest part of this, possibly the biggest part of this.
Yeah, I think that might be if that were a story, that would be like a central piece of it, is the death of Tion.
Any thoughts on that, Stefan?
Yeah, it is also because the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion is so small and stupid, and it is the fourth time by now. It all feels very superfluous, very wasteful, and losing Tien in the process, I guess, would add and compound to this. To this war is bad thing.
Yeah, such a pointless, easy war, but it took someone so precious to them away. Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. Sean, what do you think? Does that register similar to you? Do you think of anything else?
Yeah, I also like the idea of the I don't know, a lot of times the deaths in a battle are just these numbers that we hear, but when it's someone that the characters care about, even especially maybe when it's a less meaningful battle, it could full of potential for Martin to write about.
Right on. Okay. Next up. Go ahead.
I had just one small thought. I just finished a reread of Storm of Swords, and when I was thinking about the battle against the Yunkai, the Daenerys does, they are coming back like, the enemy lost 200 and we only lost a dozen. And I was thinking at that time, but for those dozen, it really sucks. Because not only did you die, but you died in that very easy battle that everyone remembers as a cakewalk. And then, so you don't get any honors or anything like that. And I think Tien's death is feeling a lot like this, because people will always talk about the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion as this easy thing, never a danger. But Egg lost an important person.
Great point.
To this, And the same, this is true about every battle, people always die. So, for example, in World War II, the invasion of Denmark caused a grand total of 37 deaths. But those 37 people, for their families,
that's everything.
They died. Yeah. They're still dead. And how do you cope with that if you die in a war that everybody views as utterly insignificant?
Yeah, to have that be the public perception of it.
Even worse.
Yeah, you're right. Just to have people think that way. Yeah, to have Egg and Dunk, especially Egg, have that thrown in his face. Like, that war, those stupid Blackfyres. Look at them accomplishing nothing, except killing my squire. Damn it. Yeah, you're right. That's a really compelling.
And Dunk, meanwhile, is like, he cares too, but he's like, I had to kill someone that reminds me of someone that I got along with.
Yeah. And then a mere 3 years later, we have another really potentially compelling event. Duncan the Small meets and immediately marries Jenny of Oldstones. So that's a long time before Summerhall still, but...
And Duncan would have been at max 19.
Yeah, you're right. At max 19.
Kind of paralleling around the time that Egg would have met Betha.
Yeah, potentially as young as 15, too.
Yeah, so. I honestly think that the younger side makes more sense because he isn't married by then. It makes more sense than if he's 19 or 18 years old and not married, to me personally. And
that's a good
more
point.
Of a foolish thing that a 15-year-old would
That's
do.
a really great point, because Duncan, the next point on the list here is Duncan fights the Laughing Storm later in that year, and he fights the Laughing Storm because Duncan the Small marries Jenny of Oldstone. So they were betrothed. If he had been 19,
they would have married.
Probably would have been married already. It's part of it is the girl's age.
Was she? I don't know how old
you're
she
right.
was.
So
that
there's the caveat, but still, you're right. That's a huge one. This one, more so than a lot of the others, is very likely to be a Duncan Egg story. These two events together are really big. You get the Laughing Storm, a character we've already seen and met. He's important. Jenny of Oldstone's massively important. But as far as like how and the details, I don't have a lot, just that it seems like a really important milestone, perhaps one of the more important ones on this list, especially because, as we'll see in a minute, going forward, the 240s, that range, I don't see much. The 250s start to get more interesting again, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Stefan, you first this time. What do you think about this Jenny of Oldstones, Duncan the Small, Laughing Storm, all that business?
I mean, I would absolutely love more information on it. Only the song is so prominent. Basically, it's the Jenny of Oldstone thing. Since the show did it, it's in everyone's mind. So I want you to know what's up with that.
Yeah.
And with the Ghost of High Heart and all of that. I have no problem with knowing the story of the Laughing Storm and that duel, but I feel that I already know the deal about that now.
It's less important than the Oldstones Jenny part, right? By a good bit.
That story is just told. It's a duel. It's honorable. Yada yada yada.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
It's not a really interesting story. Apart from maybe Dunk's feelings towards Lionel Baratheon, but then he's not that much of an important figure in the Hedge Knight.
Yeah.
I mean, he's prominent because he sticks in your head because of his character. But for Dunk himself, it is not like he's the important one. That's Baelor. And not Lionel.
Yeah.
Even Beesbury would be much more important in terms of, oh my God, I have to face this guy. So I don't think there's much drama to be had, but Jenny of Oldstones, there is some potential there.
Right on. What about you, Sean?
I'm sort of along the same line. I don't think that we can. I don't know. Is every other book going to be a tournament? Going to be a joust or whatever? I feel like he's got more to cover to that than that. Another thought I was having was how I think Stefan also mentioned earlier. Sometimes the story is ostensibly about one thing, but through the course of it, we learn about something else.
Yeah.
And I think that could happen in a lot of these topics that we're hitting.
Right on. Okay. An event that's important, but probably not going to involve Dunk and Egg is the death of Bittersteel. I'm not saying they're involved in his death. He dies in a supposedly meaningless skirmish in the Disputed Lands, so they certainly won't be directly involved in that. But whether that is happens in the span of a story that it's referenced and it's an important event that gets told, maybe. But as far as the actual event, it's hard for them to be involved in a meaningless skirmish in the Disputed Lands and have that be important somehow. Fast forward 10 whole years to 251, where we have the second sort of incursion of the Rat, the Hawk, and the Pig, this very mysterious faction, only distinguished by these animal names, and the fact that they attacked, what's-her-face, Aelora at a masked ball in Aelora, and this was involved in an event back in the 2000s there. But more relevantly here, it's another small rebellion that doesn't go very far that takes the life of someone close to Egg. His son, Daron, the one who would have married Olenna, but he followed his heart and went after a dude because he's into dudes. And he was also quite a warrior. So that's part of why he was involved in this war as a leader, but he died. So that's a pretty straightforward, if we haven't already done the stuff with Tion or maybe other things, I don't know, maybe this would be redundant, but it definitely has potential. Certainly it's later in life. Egg will be, 50 years old by this point. So, I don't know. What do y'all think about losing a son as a story, or as a potential for a story?
I almost think it's too much. I don't know how well Martin could write that or how hard it would be for an audience to read it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it is kind of tricky that way. Any thoughts on that, Stefan?
Same as with Sean. I don't know if I want to read a story of losing a son. I also have this feeling, as we are going on discussing this stuff, that all scenarios that are in where Dunk and Egg are really old characters, like 40 plus, they don't spark the same interest.
That's not that old.
I'm in the same age group, and sorry, it is, unfortunately.
Yeah,
unfortunately, it is. but they just don't interest me in the same way as the early ones.
Yeah.
So what we discussed earlier, I was always like, yeah, and now I'm feeling I'm searching for excuses to write these stories.
That's why I asked at the beginning whether the earlier stuff might be interesting. 'Cause the same thought occurred to me. Like the fact that they can't be as mobile, the fact that everything would like happen from the Iron Throne, like from the throne room, is definitely less interesting. Like the fact that he can't move around to different locations as much. Yeah, I think
they're becoming more Sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
They're becoming more interesting for the background, if you want to learn about politics, about history, about the world, etc., but not as stories with characters in them. And as I said in the very beginning of this podcast, this is what draws me to these novellas. If I want to read history, I can read Fire and Blood. There I don't need characters.
I was going to say in the same way you can't every other episode have a joust. I guess maybe you can. But you also can't have every other episode or every episode just be, egg on the throne with people coming at him with their dilemmas or
Absolutely.
whatever. He needs to go out and do stuff. And you maybe could have a couple books like that.
Like he definitely goes somewhere.
In fact, that would be very interesting. But
like he goes somewhere for Summerhall. Clearly that doesn't happen at court. So it's not like he's absolutely rooted to King's Landing, but it is... George has to come up with an explanation for why he's not at court.
This line of thought, by the way, leads me again to my supposition that maybe he's going to pepper in some other POVs, though. That is a way that he could add more intrigue to these later stories where Egg and Dunk are more physically confined. If we can see other people go off on some adventure that they requested of them or they're reporting back to. Or
I generally, Sean, don't think that'll ever be the case. But if it were, I think that it would be possible in a prologue or an episn't.
Yeah,
I think that could. I don't think that'll happen. Even that, but the idea of an epilogue doesn't turn me off.
My supposition is not that it's going to turn into the main series style of having a dozen different POVs that you constantly alternate between, but that you might have, like, instead of, I'm making numbers up, but let's just say one of the main series books has 12 of Ned, 12 of Arya, 12 of Sansa, 12 of Dany, or whatever. Yeah. We might instead have 10 of Dunk, 4 of Egg, 1 of some Maester, 1 of some Squire.
You might. Like here's one where that I think is a very strong chance where you'd need another POV is if in the last one, if like Dunk dies in Summerhall, you can't just have that be the end. Like right there, boom, it's over.
Getting an
like,
epilogue.
He's burned to death and it's over.
Like I feel like an actual epilogue to the series of the Tales of Dunk and Egg.
You're right. You at least need an epilogue. Yeah, you at least need an epilogue. Like someone
maybe. It'd be kind of an interesting narrative choice.
Just have him die and that be it. Yeah.
And the last thing he heard was,
yeah, you could. You're right. I guess I shouldn't say for sure.
That is an ending.
That is an ending.
In fact, it could even be the whole book could be his life flashing before his eyes, as if you will.
Oh,
you know
wow.
what I mean? Yeah. It could be reflecting on stories of how his squire died and how he fell in love, as he's realizing he's about to burn to death. And that could easily be a whole story, a whole book full of just different segments of it being moments of his life that he's remembering.
You want a clip show?
Yeah.
The year after Daeron's death, Tywin comes to court as a cupbearer. So you got little Tywin, young Tywin. That's the kind of thing that I think Stefan's talking about. Like, that would be fun, but is it really like that compelling? Maybe not. Maybe like again, you don't want to sell George short, but like I don't know
that in particular. But that as something that is the case during other compelling events.
You like throw that in
like that.
As part of another story.
Other things are happening, and oh look, there's Tywin. Just like how the story wasn't about Walder Frey,
right?
But he was in it.
Yeah. For example, the next year, Egg knights Barristan the Bold after Barristan the Bold beats Dunk in a tournament when Barristan the Bold is 16, meaning he's about the age. Dunk is the age Barristan is now at that point. Like in the Song of Ice and Fire, Barristan's POVs would be about this lining up of Dunk's age at that moment. But of course, the problem with that is like Sean says, like, what are we gonna have another tournament? Like what?
To return to the Summerhall thing.
Yeah.
One aspect of this story is that it needs to close the circle to the foot of a hedge knight being worth the death of a prince. So,
great point.
He rescues Rhaegar, and the rescue of baby Rhaegar will over several detours lead to the birth of Jon and Daenerys, which not Daenerys, but lead to the birth of Jon.
Yeah.
And so maybe to the defeat of the others. And I feel that this needs to be somewhere in there. And I could imagine, basically, the book really closing on Dunk dying and reflecting on how he now rescued baby Rhaegar.
With his
maybe he
feet,
goes back into... Maybe he goes back into the flames to get Aegon.
Yeah.
I don't know. But for some reason, he rescues Rhaegar first. And then he doesn't manage to get Aegon out, and then and in the end, it's like, yeah, at least the dynasty is secured, for another generation and or two, something like that. Him ending basically on this note, having secured the realm, where in truth he rescued the person that will bring down the dynasty, but in the same time sow the seed for the rescue of the world. I don't know how you do this from Dunk's perspective, but for us as readers, I think this is the important part to get across when we come to Summerhall.
That's a fantastic take.
And the impact of it.
One way you might be able to do it from Dunk's perspective is if someone has a vision of it. If someone tells Dunk, you have to say, Dunk wants to save Aegon, but no, you have to save Rhaegar. Why? I don't know. I dreamed it, but that's
you're surrounded by Targaryens in that. It may not sound at first glance it might sound a bit far fetched, but realize that we have like every living Targaryen is at Summerhall, so the chance for some casual dragon dreams to get mentioned is certainly higher than normal by a good bit. So yeah,
at a potentially mystical moment.
I personally think that in all likelihood, in a situation like this, you save the baby first.
Well, okay, so
I'm just saying.
And that is an important thing. Let's get detailed here. Rhaegar is born during Summerhall. Whether it's like during the conflagration or she's let outside, gives birth like on the lawn, something like that. It's not. But the timing is up in the air. But still,
first pregnant woman.
Yeah, you save the pregnant woman. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Hold on, no. I thought I might have my facts wrong, but I thought this whole Summerhall event was to celebrate the birth of Rhaegar. I thought he was already born.
No. Mm-mm.
No. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No. It's to wake dragons. But this was also my thought about this thing. You do not need a vision for this. You could do it perfectly as a tragedy, because it's, as you said, it's a natural thing to get the pregnant woman and or the baby out, and then you go back in to get your liege lord and best friend, best buddy. Maybe he rescues other people before. Goes in back and forth, and maybe Aegon does as well because it's just who he is. And then at one point, something bad happens. This could be our disaster movie episode. They are going in, and then this column comes crashing down, and then this part of the ceiling breaks, and more avenues are closed off, and then they go in maybe to rescue the maid, the kitchen maid, or whatever. And that is what gets them in the end. Something like that needs to be in there.
That's great.
I feel. And I think you can do this pretty well from Dunk's perspective and end with him dying. Actually, I don't think that's that weird. I don't think we need an epilogue.
Okay,
actually.
yeah, maybe,
because the epilogue is essentially all that we learn in the Game of Thrones about what happened.
You're right. We kind of already have an epilogue.
Yeah,
you're kind of right. We kind of already have it. Yeah, in a way.
By the way, Nina does clarify that their gathering was, technically to celebrate Rhaegar's birth and his, just
impending birth.
Yeah, like they knew, she's 9 months pregnant. She's about to give birth. So let's gather everyone here, and also let's do this thing that I wanted to do with the eggs that maybe I didn't tell all of you about.
Yeah, and that went a little hayfire. Yeah, just anyway.
But yeah, it was a big excuse.
I want to read that story now.
Yeah, that's really good, Stefan. You really nailed that. I think you really highlighted some of the important parts that I think from a literary perspective and I
think bringing up that we don't need an epilogue because the Song of Ice and Fire is the epilogue,
and the whole foot thing,
Fire and Blood too,
why saving his foot was important. Yeah, that's really good stuff, man.
We talked about that, I believe, when that happened, about the significance of how real that was. Yes. Little did they know.
Yeah, little did they know. Yeah, his feet are important.
His feet mattered, yeah.
Fodder for foreshadowing comments and says, "Get him! He's right there." In terms of rescuing people.
If you didn't catch this, Stefan, in each of these books, Egg yells at Dunk during a fight. He yells, "Get him! He's right there!"
Except when it's Arya and he yells, "Kill him!" He's right there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Small note here. After Summerhall is the War of Nine Penny Kings, which would be compelling, like as an event potentially, but not from Dunk and Egg since they'll be dead. But there is no Game of Thrones canon is slightly different than A Song of Ice and Fire canon in terms of Egg and Dunk and all these things. Is that there is no Jaehaerys II as a king in Game of Thrones canon. It goes straight from Egg to Aerys II. So Egg is Aerys II's father. I think it is, or they just have Jaehaerys die prematurely. I'm not sure which, but I think it's Egg is just directly Aerys' father. So that's not a big difference, because Jaehaerys only lived for 3 years. So like just swapping, eliminating him from the picture is not a big change. But if we see that happen on TV, y'all won't be surprised if they just go straight from Egg to the Mad King. Okay, let's take just a few final minutes here and talk about the two that we really have a little bit of information on and maybe flesh it out just a little bit more. That's the She-Wolves of Winterfell and the Village Hero. The other titles are the Sellsword, which we discussed a little bit, the Kingsguard, which we just don't have that much to go on. It does describe something that seems pretty straightforward, Dunk joining the Kingsguard. But other than that title, we don't know when it's sat or anything like that. The Lord Commander, which also kind of explains itself, at least on the surface. That's him becoming Lord Commander of the Kingsguard.
Presumably the fight with the Laughing Storm.
It could be that, yeah.
That is, I think, a lot of people's guess. Mine, personally.
I agree, yeah. But we pretty much discussed that already, so we don't need to rehash that. And my working title for the Summerhall one is Girls Gone Wildfire. So,
Stefan face palmed again.
Can't...
Puns.
Yep.
Who doesn't love them?
So as we said at the beginning, that quote indicated the She-Wolves of Winterfell is a working title. It's not what he intended for the title.
Yeah, it's not really in line with the other titles we've got.
Yeah, but he said he's been planning this at least as far back as 2006. At BosCon, he said this. This is an indirect quote from someone
that we know.
Westeros.org commenter Yagathai. Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Who's Yagathai?
I won't say his name because it's probably...
You tell me later. Yeah. I didn't realize we knew them. Okay, that's cool.
He mentioned something about 5 Lady Starks running Winterfell. The Wolf Women, or something like that, with 4 of them widows of a bunch of fairly recent former Lord Starks and the current Lady Stark, whose 30-something husband is fading fast from a wound taken from fighting the Ironborn.
So that's Lord Baron Stark. Baron Stark's brother Rodwell already died recently. Their father Brandon died somewhat recently. His brother Barthagen, Barth Blacksword, their Brandon and Barthagen's older brother Jonel, Jonel One Eye, and the father to Brandon, Bart, and Jonel was Cregan, as in the Cregan Stark, as in the one in the Dance of the Dragons, who had a very long reign. We're not sure how long, but it was at least 30 years. Could easily have been 40, 50, maybe even 60. Like, this dude was around a while. So that's what we talk. So I mentioned those names because it says 4 of them are widows of a bunch of fairly recent former Lord Starks. Those are the Lord Starks. Check out our House Royce episode for a fuller description of the person who is currently Lady Stark. She's Laura Royce. So that presents us with something very compelling. Here's an interesting idea. Not only do we have young Nan present at Winterfell at this time, as we probably saw in Bran's vision, Dunk kissing her, but we have the potential for something we haven't seen before, which is a character who is Lady of Winterfell, or Lady of anything, whose husband is dying slowly. So she knows that she's not going to be lady very much longer. It's like an hourglass with a very finite number of grains left. But you don't know exactly how many grains. Like, when is this lady going to die? I mean, when is this man going to die? And when he does, well, what happens next? Because there's no male Starks around, as a bunch of boys. So you have that. It's a succession crisis. And as I hinted at the beginning, there's a lot of potential for similarities between what's going to happen in the main series when Rickon, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Jon all converge on Winterfell. It's potentially around the same time, and different factions form around that. I don't know that they're going to fight each other, but people may try to fight each other in their name, things like that. So what is all this what does all this suggest to you? What are you looking forward to with this possibility?
Can I start?
Yeah, go for it,
I'm
Shay.
looking forward to there being 5 Lady Starks who all want to hook up with Dunk, but young Nan gets him. And
Oh, I didn't think of that. That is awesome. Well, Nan gets it. Nan
no,
gets
I
the-
am picturing him
the
kind of
goal.
like swarmed with women. a little bit.
Yeah. They might. I wonder if they care even more about large men in the North when like survival is closer to their heart, and
And in
survival of the
reality,
fittest.
they're probably a pretty big age range.
Yeah, definitely. Like some of those women are going to be really
All
really
the better.
Yeah, they might. That doesn't mean they're not interested. Yeah, like I'm a lady of power though. I have influence.
I have a couple thoughts. One, we could see maybe a parallel with how they are trying to make the decision of who should take the reins
Yeah, right.
to how the council goes deciding egg. We could see similar parallels or contrasts in the decision-making process. And another interesting parallel or contrast to draw is how Ned Stark leaves Winterfell, going to King's Landing, kind of in over his head with the politicking that's going on.
Yeah.
Dunk might show up at Winterfell, getting thrust to the middle of this politicking that's going on, and he's too naive to realize the implications of.
Of course, the reason they're showing up is to fight the Ironborn, but it sounds like one of my guesses is they're going to show up to help fight the Ironborn, and they're not even going to know who to swear their sword to. They're like, well, who was in charge here? So,
Yeah.
What do you think, Stefan?
We might, just on the idea of parallels, we might get a parallel to the Sand Snakes. Because there we also have a lot of women from the south, and now we have a lot of women from the north. I don't think there is any similarity. Like I don't think the She-Wolves of Winterfell are going to be fighters or something. But there might just be this thematic thing of you have women that are taking positions and carving out places in society for themselves, or at least try to. So I wouldn't be surprised if you get something like a more aggressive one, someone who is more in this, not a poisoner, obviously, but who is having the same MO.
But yeah, someone could be
and
more
Ilaria
religious,
Sand.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
Variety of
exactly.
personalities. Yeah, that's a good idea.
And motivations.
Yeah, and some of
and
them,
MOs.
just like the Sand Snakes, can have motivation of revenge.
Sure. Yeah, it could be some of them want to, like, well, whoever takes over, we're getting those damn Ironborn. Maybe Laura
Yeah.
Royce wants
Yeah.
that or something like that.
And you also have to think about it is a novella. So we have 80 pages or thereabouts.
Yeah.
We have at least 5 She-Wolves to be introduced and Nan. So they better have distinct personalities.
Yeah, you're right. Another bit about Laura Royce real quick. She's both, I know I said this before, but it's easy to forget. She is Ned's great-great-grandmother and Ned's great-grandmother. She connects both branches that eventually come around to Ned, because remember, Ned's father married his cousin, so both of those branches originate from her. So that's kind of funky. At least it's over several generations. I like that idea of yours, Sean, too, about the getting in over his head, and Stefan's idea of the comparison to the Sand Snakes. A lot of good ideas there, y'all. But I think that
That's why we're doing this.
right. And Nina's suggestion also is that there won't be any actual Ironborn fighting. That's where they're going to show up for that, but they're not going to actually do it.
I
Because as
agree.
Stefan pointed
That's what I
out,
expect.
with 80 pages, like, how do you possibly
Yeah,
get into both of
100%.
these stories? Yeah.
Also, I'm hoping it's 120 pages.
It's also not that interesting. If they just go off and fight people, that isn't necessarily that interesting. I mean, George, once again, he could make it interesting, but I do think the succession and all these characters and personalities sounds more interesting to me than just going and hack and slash, whatever. And it's also kind of set up that this won't work. We see in the Mystery Knight, Bloodraven / well, as we like to call him, Plumraven, says, yeah, fighting him on land's not going to work. You need to get on ships and go to the Iron Islands to stop him. That's the only way this is ever going to be. So, yeah, because if they did fight the Ironborn in this scenario, they'd lose. So I don't know, how is
Yeah.
George going to write that? I agree. I think we all seem to agree that there won't actually be any fighting of Dagon Greyjoy in that story. Maybe later. Nina suggests that maybe since we're told that eventually the dragons finally did intervene, obviously not real dragons, the Targaryens finally did intervene to help put down Dagon, the thing that may have changed is the succession. Not the succession, but the crown change. Meaning when Aerys dies, now Maekar takes over. Maekar's a lot more aggressive king. He's under Maekar's watch. Can you imagine him just letting that happen? Like, nah, let's go get him. This is the guy that led from the front when the Peaks rebelled. So I kind of doubt he's just gonna let these, like, it probably bothers him that they're still out there. Anyway. Let's move on. The Village Hero. So this is our last section today. As we said, it's
real quick. I would
Yeah.
like to give a shout out to Nina,
Sure.
which we always do. But if you want more speculation on who these She-Wolves of Winterfell could be, I'm sure she'll put a link in the document in the chat right now for
Yes.
a post of hers, because she's really put a lot of thought into it, and I think it's interesting stuff. But
Yeah.
beyond our purview here.
Yeah, it is a little. Unfortunately, we didn't quite have time for it. It is really good stuff. Maybe we'll have time for it some other time. These topics tend to circle back, but yeah, it is.
And
It
not
is really
just
worth
the
reading.
She-Wolves. She's got thoughts on all the potential for all the books.
Yeah. It's a shame that we don't have time to get into all of it, but we'll be able to talk about a little of it at least. So yeah, definitely highly recommend that. Check out goodqueenalley.tumblr.com with 1L. So her idea here is also going to take front and center. I really like Nina's thoughts on what might happen in the Village Hero. The Black Betha introduction is kind of a given. Maybe not, but I have a very strong sense of that. Now let's think back. Aegon IV. Well before Egg is born, he carelessly takes the land known as the Teats away from House Bracken, gives it to House Blackwood because it's a joke. To him, it's just a joke between two of his lovers. One of them was well endowed in the chest and one wasn't. And that became a thing between the Brackens and Blackwoods because they're just that petty. And so he got in on the joke and did this all business. So very strong opportunity for the Bracken-Blackwood conflict to be the front and center of a short story, especially because we know they're connected to the Blackwoods, and especially because Dunk is too. Not the Blackwoods, but to this land that lies right between their lands that we see in A Song of Ice and Fire chapter. Jaime's chapter in A Dance with Dragons is Jonas Bracken, Tytos Blackwood at Raventree Hall. He talks about Pennytree with the young Blackwood kid. Dunk doesn't know where Pennytree is, but Arlen of Pennytree is his first master. One day he's going to find out where it is, and the odds that he wants to go see it are like nearly 100%. Wouldn't you guys agree? Like, doesn't he want to go there?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So
I feel like that section of Jaime there was partly. I feel like he had to be also working on a Dunk thread at that moment.
Right, it doesn't.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it doesn't feel that related to what might happen in A Song of Ice and Fire later. Like, I really doubt we're going back to Raventree Hall. I don't think we'll see Stonehenge. I don't think the Bracken-Blackwood conflict is important for A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's part of the history. Yeah.
Yeah, he's in that same section of the garden. You know what I mean? Yeah, he's watering the tomatoes, but the carrots are right there too.
That's a good metaphor. So and it's also been set up in the Hedge Knight. We hear how the Blackwoods will never tolerate the fact that Otho Bracken's about to take over. So it's definitely set up that there's going to be a conflict here. Quentin Blackwood was killed in a tournament. So yeah, and the blood, we've got lingering resentment over the Blackfyre rebellions because one was on one side. Bittersteel was a Bracken, Blood Raven's a Blackwood. So really, it's super. The groundwork is immense here. Nina's idea is that they go to Pennytree for this reason, to visit Dunk's ancestral, whatever. It's not really his. He's not from it, but his connection, what little family connection he has in this world. And when they arrive, stuff breaks out, where stuff is already broken out, and they find themselves in the center of a conflict, which is somewhat on theme from where they've been before, but it'd definitely be different than the way, say, the water rights is resolved. We also have a strong idea of how this is resolved. By the time Jaime's chapter rolls around, neither the Brackens nor Blackwoods own Pennytree. It is considered a royal fief. The crown owns it, even though it's all the way over in the Riverlands. What does that say to me? Well, that says to me that they just kept fighting over it. So the crown was like, look, y'all, neither of you get it.
It's some sort of compromise. Yeah.
Stop fighting over it. If you fight over it now, you're fighting the crown. So that's going to put a stop to this. It really I don't know. It's hard. It fits so well that it's hard for me to entertain other theories. But okay, so that's a lot. I've just said a mouthful there. What do you guys think about this? Any other details? Any other
Totally
threads?
agreed.
Totally agree, huh? Nice.
Yeah, I don't think I could express it better than Nina did in her 14 paragraphs in our notes.
Yeah.
I assume are also available for other people to read.
Yeah,
so.
she writes about this more. I want to highlight one thing she brought up, which is how this scenario will highlight Bloodraven's partisanship. That he can't think, neutrally on this matter.
Yeah, he might not be. Or even if he does, it won't look like he did.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, by the way, I'm still newly absorbing all this world information that other people might be more experts on. Probably all of our viewers, but in case not, because he is a
Blackwood.
Bracken, right?
He is a
Blackwood.
Blackwood.
All right, I got it mixed up, but it's
and Bittersteel's a Bracken. Yeah, Bittersteel's half Bracken, Bloodraven half Blackwood. So yeah.
But same father.
Yes.
So
yes.
right. But anyway, point being that they're potentially at least going to have motivations or biases or whatever.
Yeah, even if you don't, who wouldn't think that you do? And realistically, he does.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've even thought about, because George spent time with Brienne also talking about this conflict between the Brackens and the Blackwoods, and to me, it's just a part of this bigger world that in some way George is cultivating. And a lot of times I have in the past, and probably many people are thinking about what he's cultivating through Game of Thrones, Storm of Swords, and how that's going to work itself into Dream of Spring or whatever.
Yeah.
But it just as easily could work backwards. He could be cultivating other future books, even if they're backwards in the timeline.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Good said. A couple random notes here, more to sort of grease the wheels to get you more interested in some of these things that we didn't talk about. I'll use it as a little segue for a little minor sales pitch here. If you sign up as a Patreon at the $4 or $10 or above level, you get access to every script we've ever done, every document we've ever written for an episode. So that includes these. So you get all of our notes, but that also includes Nina's notes since they're in our documents. So hey, you get quite a lot of value for that, because some of these things that we put in these documents don't make the episodes because sometimes we just have too much.
I would like you to reach out to us if you actually use this feature. I've always been very curious because I think it's great, but I don't know if anyone ever uses it.
Yeah, we don't get to see who's browsing our document. We don't know if y'all are doing it. So yeah, it is interesting. We know some people have mentioned that they want it, but it isn't something that gets discussed a lot. So yeah, we are curious. That's for our own edification. Let us know if you have used that feature before, or if you plan on it. So these last few notes here, a couple other characters that could appear during the time of Dunk and Egg that'd be pretty compelling for us, that might, or at least be fun to see, like Walder Frey. We mentioned Princess Elena last time, but Princess Daenerys is a possibility. Obviously not Dany from, who was, as Stefan pointed out, like 12 when the books start. We're talking about the Daenerys who married Maron Martell, the Water Gardens Daenerys. She was born in 172, which would make her 50 at the time of the Mystery Night. So entirely possible she's still alive and could still live for quite a while longer. It would be really cool to meet her, to have her on screen, even if it's just for a minute. She could come to court, or they could go back to Dorne. That'd be fun, huh? Yeah. Another one's Jon Arryn. Jon Arryn would have been 15 or so when the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion happened. So he could have been involved somehow. Obviously, Barristan Selmy, we mentioned him. There's plenty of places for him to pop up. He's at court. He becomes, he's in these duels or jousts or whatever, and may have been in the Hawk and the Pig Rebellion, all that stuff. Yeah, Olenna Tyrell, you're right. Or, yeah, she'd be red wine then Tyrell. Yeah. You could have both. You could have that transition even.
That's who I most want to see.
And
young Olenna.
And last but not least, there's another really compelling note by Nina. What will Daella Targaryen think of the rebellion between the Laughing Storm and the Crown? Because Daella would have already had an affair with Dunk by then. So now her father is going to war against the Crown, and her father is fighting Dunk in single combat. Her father fighting someone she had an affair with. That's pretty compelling. It might be hard to get that into the story without her POV, but I feel like if George is gonna write that would be one of the more compelling parts of it.
You're right. He should include another POV. I agree.
I would like to clarify this again, just if anyone wonders. We do not know that it is Dela that Dunk hooks up
That's
with.
true. It's not 100%.
It could be Ray.
Yeah.
It makes more sense for it to be Dela for a couple of reasons in terms of age, whatever, and alliteration. George likes that. But just FYI, we don't know if it's Ray or Dela.
The conflict would be the same, of
Yeah.
course, with Ray. Either daughter.
I just want to make
you
it
know.
clear that
Yeah.
we are assuming this.
Good point. Good point. Okay. Do we have any final thoughts? Stefan, any final takes? Certainly tell everyone where to find you again while you're at it. And thanks for coming today. You had a lot of excellent thoughts, and I'm glad we could circle back and make this work after our miss the first time.
Thank you for all the compliments. I fear I fired all my cylinders. I do not have any brilliant takes in this end. But if you are giving me more time and more podcasts, you can always hop over to our program. It's the Boiled Leather Audio Hour. You can find it everywhere you can find podcasts. And of course at Patreon, patreon.com/Boiled Leather Audio Hour. We have lots of bonus stuff as this goes, bonus podcasts, bonus essays, yada, yada, yada. Just go over there, check it out. I would love to hear from you.
Right on. Thanks again, Stefan. And Sean, any final thoughts from you?
Two things. One a little quicker than the other. One is, Stefan, I'm sorry you're slightly missing out on this, but we got to feature our shirts, Aziz.
Oh.
Looks like you've got an Ironborn one.
I do. I have another Sanrixian shirt. It's an Ironborn Kraken. We do not sew.
That's
Greyjoy
messed
action.
up. You just said you'd rather see Winterfell than them fighting Ironborn.
What about them like befriending Ironborn? I didn't weigh
What
in
do you
on
have,
that.
Sean?
I joined a new gang.
You joined a
The
gang.
Tough Brits.
Oh,
Tough Brits. If anyone, the Flight of the Conchords reference.
Flight of the Conchords,
That's
so good.
The other thing I would just wanted to touch back on from earlier, just thinking about what Martin's thinking about. He's made a few comments about his favorite movies, and so one, I thought it might be interesting to think about what his favorite movies might be, some hints of the things that he might want to put in his stories, and some of them are like almost obviously like Lady Hawk was a story about two lovers who one during a day turns into a hawk and one during the night turns into a wolf, but there's like this hour in the middle where they get to be human with each other. But anyway, it's kind of like the warging, that some of the characters do in his world. You kind of see the hints of that there. And he's also named Pan's Labyrinth, which is sort of this fantasy horror kind of thing. Martin hints at horror sometimes. He also said The Iron Giant, which is animated, and it's about a little boy with this big iron robot companion, kind of like Dunk and Egg. And I wonder if there's if that's maybe some hope that it might be an animated series, if that's something he likes anyway. He's got really good taste. Obviously, The Lord of the Rings, Princess Bride, The Holy Grail. Anyway, just I'm sure there's probably more to unpack by looking at Martin's other favorite books. And it's all this. My one final thought on this, though, is that he didn't list any Westerns, even though we kind of saw this Western theme in a lot of his writing. And so it makes me wonder what else we might see, even though he hasn't alluded to it elsewhere. Anyway.
We'll have to ask George what his favorite Westerns are next time we get a chance.
Yeah.
Adding on to what you just said there, Sean, too. George, referring to the Iron Giant, just backing up how much a fan of the Iron Giant George is. I went to his bookstore in Santa Fe. One of his assistants was showing me around it. And one of the cool features of that bookstore, for one thing, is it's like almost everything in that store is signed, not just by him, but it's like a full bookstore where like 90% of the books in the store are signed by the author, and a lot of them are him, of course, but a lot of them aren't. So, of course, you walk in the store, it's really nicely organized, and there's a huge Iron Giant just sitting right in the middle of it.
Cool.
Yeah, it's just right there in the middle, like prominently displayed. And I think it's like one of the ones from one of the movies, like an actual prop or something. I forget there's a story behind it, but it's slipping my mind. So, thought y'all would enjoy that little anecdote. Oh, and and the two people working behind the counter were Roger Zelazny's children. It's like, whoa, this is like another world here. So anyway, thanks again, everyone. We mentioned our House Royce episode. That's additional listening related to the She-Wolves of Winterfell and that Stark ancestry that's super compelling and interesting. Of course, check out the Boiled Leather Audio Hour and the Nerdstream era. Check out Dancing Sean on YouTube, his movie shorts. doing very well over there, getting that started.
Follow me on Twitter.
Yeah, follow Sean on Twitter. Do you have a cat for us today, Sean?
I could easily go get at least one cat.
All right, let's do that. Let's have our outro kitten, as we like to call them, while I issue additional thanks. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Ashea for doing so much behind the scenes here and adding her voice at the same time. Once again, thanks to Nina for so many great takes, notes, and observations. Thanks to our mods at our Facebook group. History of Westeros Facebook group is bumping. Lots of great discussions. I expect it to pick up even more now that we have a trailer and stuff like that going on. The hype levels are rising a bit thanks to House of the Dragon, but there's always consistent discussions happening over there. We've also got our communities over at Discord, and you can always reach out to us on Twitter or email, etc. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld. That's claridox.de is his website for our video intro and for the wonderful maps you see behind us. Michael was recently sharing with me him dressing up kind of like Mrs. Doubtfire for his school. It's like great photos. Hi, Michael. Thanks also to Kevin McLeod for the Valar Rereadis intro music, rather. Thanks to Joey Townsend and Jesse Koval for the regular History of Westeros intro outro music. Thanks to the Bengineer for the sound quality assistance and engineering, as the name indicates. And check out our friends over at Here Be Dragons. They'll be getting started shortly after this live stream. If you're hearing the podcast version, you can check them out on YouTube at your leisure. Their topic today is how to bring your A game to the D&D table.
Sean just brought his A game of kittens.
Oh.
He has Jet here today, the black kitten.
Very nice.
Oh, Jet is like the most behaved out of all of them, I feel like.
She is definitely the most okay with being held.
Yeah.
Nice.
She's not camera shy.
Excellent.
She's cute.
And I'd say overall, Toph is probably the least trouble of the three of them. But she also is the least willing to not that she doesn't want to ever be held, but she's the least likely to stay in my arms.
Well, they're looking big.
Yeah.
Well, the cat says the cat waving goodbye is our sign for the rest of us to say goodbye. Our schedule will be we'll be continuing to put out episodes over the next few months. Of course, they won't be every Sunday. As I said, it won't be Valar Rereadis style for a little while, but we will be getting back to Valar Rereadis in 2022 right away. January 2nd, 2022, Valar Rereadis returns with The World of Ice and Fire. In the meantime, take a look out for many scripted episodes and a couple other live streams on different topics that you will see when we announce them. Until then, thanks again to our guests. Thanks again to everyone who came live. And thanks to everyone who's left us a review on your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube, wherever you consume History of Westeros. And until next time, you know what to do. Valar Rereadis.